Thanks very much for being with, and we're going to continue our meeting. And I believe we are on the consent calendar. We are on items 9 through 13. Before we, Councilmember Willie, if you could make it back up to the dais, be great if we could. And I'm gonna call order fairly soon with regard to being able to continue our meeting. All right, thanks very much. So before we start with the consent calendar, I would like to bring forward a motion to reopen our postponements and orders of the day. And the reason I would like to do that will become clear in a moment if I get a second for this. Councilmember Moore, are you willing to second? Your hand is raised in Zoom.
Yes, I'd like to second that.
Okay, great. So on the discussion part of this, I believe that we have one item number 17, with regard to a legislative aid and review process that has, within the recommendations, appointing a couple council members to the legislative aid subcommittee, which would be our guaranteed continuity, represented by council members Moore and Way, for the subcommittee membership. And so that's my reason to ask. So hopefully we can get this reopened to consider that, which would require further motion. So are there any of my colleagues who care to comment on this at this point? Councilmember Moore, you still have your hand raised. Did you want to comment on this? Okay, and I'll go ahead and move to any members of the public if they wanted to comment on the motion on the table, which is to reopen postponements and orders of the day. I don't see any hands raised. And so, Madam City Clerk, could you please conduct a roll call vote on this?
Councilmember Moore?
Aye.
Councilmember Way?
Aye.
Councilmember Willie?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Chow?
Aye.
Mayor Paul?
Yes.
The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you very much. And so we are back to postponements and orders of the day. I'd like to request that we put item 17 on the consent calendar. I also, I don't know how to do this, but let me refer to our city attorney. So Chris, item number 16 is the city work program student internship program, which is near and dear to my heart. This is a proposal by me, but the recommended action also has direction by the staff to identify formation of a council subcommittee and appoint 2 council members to guide the final candidate selection process. Could I put that on consent with a recommendation for a couple of council members? Is that possible? Or could I ask to put that on consent, I should say?
If you're changing the recommended action, it may be cleaner to leave it on the action calendar.
Action calendar. Okay, fair enough. Okay, then I will just move that we place item number 17 on the consent calendar. May I have a second? And Councilmember Moore, your hand is raised.
Aye.
So that's, you're seconding the motion, is that correct?
Yes, I'm seconding.
Okay, great. So on the table is moving item number 17 along with its recommended action to the consent calendar. Are there any members of the public that have comments? I don't see any hands raised in Zoom, and I don't see anyone filling out blue cards. So let me go ahead and go back to council to see if anyone has any comments on this before we take a roll call vote. Madam City Clerk, would you please conduct a roll call vote on this? And this is to add item number 17 to the consent calendar.
Councilmember Moore?
Aye.
Councilmember Way?
Aye.
Councilmember Willie?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Chow?
Aye.
Mayor Paul?
Yes.
The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you very much. And so we're on to the consent calendar. I'm going to go ahead and ask if anybody from council would like to pull any of items 9 through 13 or 17 at this time from consent. I don't see any hands raised. Let me ask if any members of the public would like to speak on any of the items 9 through 13 or 17 on the omnibus consent calendar before going to, okay, so once again, this is items 9 through 13 as well as 17. No hands raised in Zoom, and I don't see blue cards being filled out. I'll entertain a motion for items 9 through 13 and item 17 as recommended in the agenda. May I have a motion to that effect? And I don't see any hand raised next to me on the dais from Councilmember Willie.
Yeah, so moved.
Okay, Councilmember Willie moves. Would anyone like to second? And I don't see hands raised on Zoom. I'll start looking at perhaps anyone? Consent? I'll go ahead and second it. So Councilmember Willie moves, and I second the consent calendar items as recommended in the agenda. Any comment, discussion from council? Councilmember Willie?
So,
Jennifer?
comment.
Oh, you asked to pull 11? I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I did ask the
I
members of the
apologize.
audience.
That is my fault, Mayor. I did have the speaker card.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. So let me withdraw my second for the motion at this time so that we take the motion off the table and take a look at item number 11. And I apologize, this kind of Zoom, I would rather not have screens blocking me for, various points of view, but I'm getting old on the dais here, 8th year, and, I cannot work on this 11-inch otherwise really wonderful MacBook Air with the M1 chip, but I can't see the material anymore, and also call on all the Zoom functions. So I need to have this other monitor. With all apologies to the public as well as our excellent video department. So we have Rhoda Fry on item 11 and Jennifer Griffin asking to pull. Okay, so let us go ahead and do that. Let me ask our members of the public, did you sorry about this, but did you simply want to speak on this item, or did you want to pull the item from the calendar? Okay, one says speak, one says pull. So I guess by default we're going to go with we're going to pull item number 11 then. So let us take a motion for items 9, 12, 13, and 17, and I'll go back to the original movement. Or actually, Councilmember Moore, you have a hand raised. Did you want to move those items?
Yes, so moved.
As recommended? Okay, and I'll go to the original movement. Councilmember Woolley, would you like to second that motion?
Yeah, but you left off 10.
Oh.
Should be 9, 10, 12. And
Oh, thank you. I misspoke. 9, 10, 12, 13, and 17. Councilmember Moore, do you accept that?
Moved as corrected.
Okay, thank you very much. And Councilmember Woolley seconds?
Second.
Okay, good. So let us see if we have any further comments from either the public or from council. I don't see any hands raised from public, and there were no other cards for other items on consent. And so having a motion and a second for items 9, 10, 12, 13, and 17, Madam City Clerk, could you please conduct a roll call vote on these items as recommended in the agenda?
Councilmember Moore?
Aye.
Councilmember Way?
Aye.
Councilmember Willie?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Chow?
Aye.
Mayor Paul?
Yes.
The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you very much. And we are on to item number 11. Item number 11 is the consideration of approval of the electric vehicle parking expansion request for proposals with a couple of recommended actions involving a purchasing exemption, waiving a formal competitive bidding process, as well as an RFP to provide electric vehicle charging stations, requesting that we approve a proposal for 6 of those sites on City of Cupertino properties. Madam City Manager, are there any members of, actually, you know what, our regular course of action is to ask the individual who has pulled this, and so very briefly, as I kind of peer over this monitor, very briefly, I believe is either Rhoda Fry or Jennifer Griffin. Would you like to come up and just try to help guide us with regard to how we will proceed with this item number 11, because yours were the requests to pull the item off of the consent calendar?
I'm not familiar with this process.
Just very briefly, why did you pull item 11, I guess is the...
Because I think that all projects should go to bid and have transparency in the city. And the other issue was I had some questions about the locations, that I disagreed with some of the locations.
Okay, so let's go back to staff. Thank you very much, Rhoda.
Thank you.
You'll still be given your opportunity to speak on the item once we have speaking from the staff on this item number 11. And so with that to guide our presentation or discussion, Madam City Manager, did you want to introduce the item or introduce the person from our staff who will be speaking to this item number 11?
Sure, Mayor Paul, would you want to hear another speaker? There were 2 hands raised.
Oh, but that was just a matter of trying to figure out why the item was pulled. And so I think Jennifer will be able to speak to the item itself once we hear from staff.
Oh,
And so, unless Jennifer, you'd like to, very briefly, Jennifer, we're not putting you on a 3-minute timer, but if you have anything
No.
to add to what Rhoda said.
Lord, I've been doing this for 23 years.
Yes.
Normally, yeah, I think if you pull the item, then whoever gives a brief presentation, if that's possible. I don't know if Public Works is here, but I had some questions about what exactly this was and some of the ramifications. So
Understood.
if you had someone that could introduce it briefly
Yes,
and
that's
talk
what we're
about
trying
it.
to do.
Okay, thank
All
you.
right, thank you, Jennifer. Okay, well, Madam City Manager, we're back to you. And is anyone from Public Works here who can speak? I see actually Director Morley is on Zoom here. And so
Good evening.
thank you very much, Director
ahead.
Morley. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here. So this item is a part of our CIP from last fiscal year. This is a project that would propose to install electric vehicle charging stations at a number of city properties. We're handling this through an RFP process. The idea behind this is that we're looking for businesses to come in and tell us where they can come in, install, manage, and operate the charging stations, as opposed to the city doing it ourselves, thinking that if this is somebody's business model, that they would be the professionals and be able to do it in the most efficient way possible, and to tell us what that would look like. In the RFP, and that's the reason that we're using the RFP and looking to do something besides a formal bid for this particular project. So it's justified through our municipal code. We need council's support of that, and that's why we're here tonight on that particular portion of the item. We did try to be all-inclusive in terms of the properties that we're considering, so that we can cast as broad a net as possible. Through an RFP process, it allows us to negotiate with the vendors and to narrow the process and the contract agreement down to something that's more restrained or meets our operational needs more specifically. So if we need to, for instance, adjust the hours at a particular location or eliminate a particular location completely, we can have that option through the negotiations of the contract process. But we certainly wanted to be able to incorporate as much as possible upfront so that we can do the evaluation. The process will be competitive when we're selecting a vendor. So it's not a sole source type of a process. We'll actually be getting submittals from multiple vendors, we hope many, that are interested in this, and we'll go through an evaluative process. The evaluative process will consider a number of items, including what is the best deal for the city. So this one, that might include revenue, it might include the number of charging stations, it might include the system behind it that operates the chargers and how friendly that is to the public. But since we're not operating it, we'll be somewhat agnostic to the actual company that operates it behind the scenes. So this leaves us with quite a few options. We're excited about the project. We're excited about the impact environmentally that this can make, and the way that it can help the city of Cupertino take a next step in providing electric vehicle charging stations for our residents. And that concludes my presentation. Of course, we're here to support the conversation.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Matt. And real quick question. So what's the difference between if we're having a competitive process and you're selecting and an RFP and a regular RFP? I mean, just, from a summary perspective.
If this was a formal bid, then we would go through and hire a designer to do a full engineered design for each location, and we would bid that out to contractors to construct it, and then subsequently we would find through another process a company to operate it, or we would operate it ourselves. In an RFP process, we're asking somebody to provide that in a turnkey type of a fashion, so that they're doing all of the above. And we're staying out of that portion of the business. It saves us in the RFP process, we think, from being in a situation where we're operating a system that we may not be the best to operate. It also will save us from doing the design on facilities where it may not make sense from an economic perspective or from a viability perspective to have electric vehicle charging stations. So we're looking for the professionals to come in early to tell us what's viable.
I see.
And so that's the difference.
Okay. And then with regard to the low bidding process, is that something that you can essentially not have to adhere to in an RFP process as you're describing, or is this
through the findings that the council make, that allows us to consider other factors besides cost? So we'll include cost in the assignment. So we're hoping that this is revenue generating to the city, so actually a positive inflow of dollars. But there's a possibility that it could be sort of dollar neutral. depending on the evaluation process and what proposals we get. For instance, if we get a proposal for 3 charging stations that brings in a few dollars a month, and a proposal for 20 charging stations that is cost neutral, we might choose the cost neutral one in order to get that many more charging stations. So there's a balance of evaluation through the proposals.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate the clarifying questions here. I see Councilmember Moore has a hand raised, but I would like to see if we can hear from members of the public. We did have a couple of blue cards filled out here. One was from Rhoda Fry, and the other was from Jennifer Griffin, and I can go to our members of the public as well in Zoom. San R has a hand raised, and I'm not going to change midstream in the middle of a meeting how we call on people. And so Rhoda and Jennifer, we're going to go to Zoom first, and then we're going to go to you guys. Okay, so by the time San R is done speaking on this item number 11, or 3 minutes have elapsed, we'll keep track, whichever's longer. Please have your hand raised in Zoom if you'd like to speak on this item, or have your blue card filled out, or send an email to city clerk, all one word, at cupertino.org during that time. Again, during the time San R is speaking, or within the first 3 minutes. Welcome, San.
Thank you, City Council. I wanted to update you that I have sent you via email a couple of very recent articles on the cybersecurity risks that have recently come to light, where hackers are using these EV charging stations to insert cybersecurity hacks on the back-end electrical grid. And so I'd like to have the city staff make sure they're aware, firstly, of the cybersecurity risks that have come to light just in the last 2 months. The publication that I sent you is a well-respected technical publication called Ars Technica, and that has been sent to you by email. And so given this item was on consent calendar, I just wanted to make sure, given this opportunity, to highlight to you that there is and urge you to take a look at it. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. You did blip out, just to let you know, for about 5 seconds near the end of your comment there. Okay, so thank you very much, San. And next we have Rhoda Fry, followed by Jennifer Griffin. Welcome, Rhoda. And before we, so another 2 minutes for Rhoda before we close the Zoom hands and the blue cards, because San only took about a minute. Rhoda, welcome.
Hey, so thank you for explaining the procurement process. I would like to see that the proposals come back to council for complete transparency. Also want to talk about the locations. Given that City Hall is about to be remodeled and we've yet to understand the details, I think that it's premature to place an EV where it could interfere with construction. I'm asking that the Blackberry Farm location be removed from the RFP. I am puzzled by the location, so I phoned the Parks and Rec Department, and they were unaware of this proposal. I think that Public Works needs to consult with Parks and Rec and vice versa so they can share best practices. Contrary to the report, Blackberry Farm parking lot is not open 24/7. There was a gate which broke many years ago. And like other parks, it officially closes 1 hour after sunset. In the off-season, there are very few cars. Now, I was going to take pictures every day and show them to you, but I didn't get around to it. But, you know, it's like maybe around 5 in the afternoon, usually maybe 3 cars at this time of year. So don't think it's a good place. There's also a private house inside the park that has restrictions on driveway use. And our former Public Works Director, Ralph Qualls, described the access to the area as a choke point and a safety issue. And my recollection of the 2006 MND was that there should not be lighting there at night in order to protect wildlife. So that would include vehicles driving through at night. And of course, you might recall that a few years ago, a mountain lion ate a goat at McClellan Ranch. So we do know that they frequent the area. If there is a desire to have an EV station on this side of town, the Monte Vista Rec Center, where there's year-round programming and is more accessible, would be a superior location. Please remove the Blackberry Farm location from the RFP now. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhoda. And Madam City Clerk, are there any further blue cards in on this item number 11?
No, Mayor.
Okay, and seeing no further Zoom hands raised. Are there any other emails? Were there any emails that came in during this time?
No emails, Mayor.
Okay, great. Now we have our next and final speaker on this item number 11, Jennifer Griffin. Welcome. Jennifer.
Hi, thank you very much. Whoops. Okay. Oh.
Okay, actually, we do have one more blue card apparently, and sorry, Jennifer.
That's okay.
Video, if you could,
That's
thank you,
fine.
video.
No, I'm glad
right.
you all were able to pull this item. I think that it's very good to have this type of thing around town. I just had a couple of questions because it sounds like that these stations, that the public will have to pay for them, which I think is fair. A lot of us that don't have electric vehicles have to pay for gas. And I see, I have one member of the family that has a hybrid car. And I think it's fair is fair. You have people, we are going toward electric vehicles, and therefore the public will have to realize that they have to pay for this. If you do not have a charging station at your home, you're going to have to use a public facility. And I'm concerned that the public does not understand this. They think that the charging is free. That isn't, unfortunately, that isn't the way things work. And if you're going to be, like, I see a lot of the charging stations at the library, and then there's a business on El Camino where the store had closed and people were coming in at 9 o'clock at night and plugging their car in. And I think that there needs to be a discussion with the public about what we're doing with charging. You know, you have to pay for things like this. And I'm also concerned about parking spaces being taken up. I have no problem with electric vehicle charging, but we need to make sure that we're not taking over a lot of parking spaces that the public are already using. We already have Laura Friedman's AB 2097, which comes in January, which reduces the parking minimums across the state. I am concerned that this bill will probably eliminate EV parking spaces and parking spaces for the public. Also, we're going to have to step up the handicap stalls because developers are going to be trying to cut corners and not provide parking spaces for handicapped. What about people that are handicapped and have electric vehicles that they want to charge? Have we talked about this? Also, the cords are tripping hazards for seniors. We need to make sure that I see cords laying around everywhere. This business that was shut down and was empty for many months on El Camino in Sunnyvale had people over there. It was by the Petco. I would see them, and the cords were laying all over the place. So we need to make sure that these sites are maintained by the vendors. The cords are picked up and kept off the ground so you don't have seniors tripping on them. And also, what are we doing in terms of where are these going and what vendors are we dealing with?
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are back to item number 11 from the council, and so we are not, actually, thank you very much for the reminder. Welcome back, Lisa, and yes, we do have a final blue card from Lisa Warren.
This will be quick, because I'll be honest, I didn't read the attachments to this item. I didn't know it would be pulled. I'm glad it was pulled. I'm very interested and believe I agree wholeheartedly with Rhoda's comments, but my thing with charging stations is there always seem to be in the primo parking spots up front and center, and I would hope that there's a little more equity in where they're placed with whoever it is that you end up working with and designing. That's all I have. Just please consider that if it's possible to remember to do that.
Okay, thank you very much, Lisa. And we are back on item number 11. Would anyone like to ask some follow-up questions of staff at this point from council? Councilmember Moore, your hand was raised. And then followed by Councilmember Willie, followed by Vice Mayor Chow. In the interest of time, I might just kind of put a couple of minutes on each of these rounds of questions here. So, Councilmember Moore, we'll start with you.
I'm not sure if these really count as questions. I'm actually more inclined to want to see this item return with some more information, because there's a couple of things I'm concerned about, and one is regarding the references to essentially our purchasing policy. So our purchasing policy is about two pages long. It's a summation of what we have in our municipal code. All of that in total is about 12 pages. When I look at Los Altos, they've just adopted a 46-page purchasing policy, which covers a lot more topics. So I know we are supposed to have had our purchasing policy updated back in 2019, and it still has yet to come to council to get adopted. So I'd like to see that before we agree to following the process suggested in the staff report. The other policy I'm concerned about is the policy regarding where these stations are placed on a property, whether it is closest to the door, which is, and I agree, they tend to be placed right next to the ADA stalls in the closest locations. So is that really the policy we want to have? I'd like to have some input on the design locations, what they intend to put, because some of these have screens where they have advertising, an LED screen which is going to generate light, and maybe that's something we want, maybe it isn't. What kind of design do we want? I'd like to have some feedback on the existing stations. How did it go? I didn't see bidding on the vendor selection in the past 3 agreements regarding electric charging station installation. I don't understand how it could possibly bring in revenue for the city, and we don't have enough data, in my opinion, regarding the surrounding grid availability.
Okay, well, you're at a couple minutes, so let me kind of go to
Can I wrap up?
Oh, if you can wrap up briefly, sure.
I can. Okay, and then for policy also, we have some competition here for resources from people who might be in apartments, houses, your business owners, and the city now. Whose responsibility is it to provide the charging stations? Because if we build it, we're providing a service for other people who then don't need to. I'm not saying which is the right way to go, but it needs us to think about what our policy is moving forward, and statistics on what we expect to have as vehicles in the future.
You promised a brief wrap up, so I'm going to hold you to that. So let's go to Council Member Willie, followed by Vice Mayor Chow, and then I'd like to make some brief comments on this one. And so, again, let's try to keep this within a couple minutes. Councilmember Willie.
Yeah, mine, I think, is just a question to Director Morley. If he can kind of say a few words about the chargers that we already have at City Hall. Do we run those, or is an outside place doing it? Is it generating revenue? What's the premium charge for the electricity for the users? I'd sure like to know where we stand on that.
Okay, sure. Director Morley.
Thank you. Yeah, so good questions. So the charging stations we operate in terms of the city is the owner. There is a small revenue stream. It's not significant by any means. I think the city's policy on charging stations has been to encourage the adoption of electric vehicles, and by placing charging stations, you are encouraging their adoption. That's also the reason for the location of the charging stations in the premier locations, is to really encourage electric vehicle charger adoption. In terms of what the users are paying for charging stations, they essentially pay cost recovery for the electricity that's being used. There's a small revenue source that comes to the city that pretty much offsets the maintenance cost. So it's essentially a net zero to the city for their installation. In the case of Cupertino, the original charging stations were purchased through an MTC grant that was done Bay Area wide. A number of cities participated. I was with the city of San Jose when that occurred. Los Gatos also participated in that. And those stations were installed by a separate company, provided by at a discount by ChargePoint at the time. And currently, they're owned by the city, and the system that the software behind the system is operated by ChargePoint. And we have sort of access like you would for any kind of a controlled, managed system, software as a service type of a system.
Okay, that's your 2 minutes, Councilmember Willie. We'll move on. Sorry, do you have a follow-up question?
I can wait if you're going to give us.
Okay, we'll do a round robin. All right, thank you very much. Councilmember Chow. Vice Mayor?
Thank you. Yeah. So I'm glad to see that in the scope of work, it says that at the end of the termination of the agreement, there will be complete and timely removal of the EVCS equipment and material, which is good, but I wonder what is the duration of this agreement. I didn't find it. What's the duration that they will sign? In case it doesn't work out, we could terminate and find a better vendor.
Through the mayor, thank you, Vice Mayor, for the question. The term we're expecting to be lengthy, so we're looking at least a 10-year term. There will be cancellation for performance reasons, so we'll have the opportunity to exit the agreement as needed. And counter to that, if the agreement is producing well and we're comfortable, we'll have the opportunity to extend it. Obviously, those would be at the council's discretion in the future, should we get to that point.
Okay, thank you. And since this will be a for-profit entity, and I wonder if the city has a say on how much fee they charge for Cupertino residents. And also, they will be using the city property for installing this. It's a benefit for the residents, but they do make a profit. So I think the contract should recognize how much rental fee the city is waiving. So that's part of the agreement. Yeah, and then I agree with that probably the Monta Vista Rec Center is a better location than Blackberry Farm, and the EV charging station for the parking lot shouldn't be all located in the same spot. It should be more distributed. Thank you. Yeah, could you answer the question?
Certainly. So with respect to revenue, and in general, with a lot of the questions associated with this, and the nice part about an RFP is we bring in the vendors to tell us what works best. So the vendors will be responsible for telling us what they think the best proposal looks like in terms of revenue to them and offset to rent to the city. So we'll be able to compare multiple vendors and pick what option works best for Cupertino. Same thing goes for the design factors that go into it. So vendors will be able to propose whether or not they would like an LED screen as a revenue source, and we can make that as part of our evaluation criteria. They'll also be responsible for telling us things like the grid availability and what the viability and costs associated with the initial install is. And that will not be a burden that the city will have to take on.
Alrighty, let's go on to Councilmember Wei.
So my question is, it looks like, at least what I understand, to install charge stations is really for sustainability and environmental issues. We're encouraging, EV electric vehicles, and it's part of our city plan. So I want to know, why are we hanging out on this? Is it too much cost, or what are the concerns? Because I think it's the way that our city and almost all the cities in the Bay Area are moving forward to. So that's my question.
And my experience is that many cities are subsidizing the installation and providing the property for installation of charging stations in exchange for a small take on the revenue as a way of encouraging more electrical vehicle usage throughout the Bay Area. So that's one of the methods that cities have been using and that's part of the climate action plan for Cupertino. And I think probably the origination of this capital improvement project when council put it in the CIP.
Okay, thank you, Matt. I have one follow-up question. So this is part of the climate action and part of our work plan. If I understand from your answer, why we're not going to, outside bids, and it is actually to save the city process and money. And I do believe the company we're dealing with is a very reputable company that, this is not first time we're dealing with it, right?
So we haven't decided. So the stage of the process that we're in right now is just asking for council's approval of an RFP as a method for obtaining a company. So we don't have a company to do the work for us yet. Because it's not a low bid process, the Muni Code requires that we come to council and say, hey, we'd like to take on this other process, and an RFP is a standard procurement process. So that's the stage we're at now. We would come back for award of contract should council like us to do that at a later point to be able to execute the contract with the selected vendor at that particular time. But we haven't gone through that selection process, so we don't have anybody in mind. We've talked to about a half a dozen different vendors to make sure that there was interest in the industry, but we definitely don't have a preferential direction that we're going in any particular way. It might be a different story if we were operating a facility, because we would want some synergies in the software in the back end. But because we won't be operating it, there's not that need. So we're really looking for the best deal for the city in a sort of holistic perspective.
Okay, thank you for the explanation.
Okay, great. Can you speak to any of the cybersecurity issues that were raised by the first commenter, Director Morley?
So I'm not aware of issues with hacking of electrical vehicle charging stations. I will read the article to make sure that that's a caution that is considered. In this particular case, the electrical vehicle charging stations will not be connected to the city's infrastructure. So it would be a complete standalone communication system. Typically, they're done through a cellular connection. So it's not a hardwired connection as well.
Okay.
But regardless,
Okay.
it would be.
Yeah, I want to be efficient. So with regard to the concern about Blackberry Farm, what are your thoughts on that? Because there was a commenter that had indicated that perhaps that wouldn't be an optimal location for our purposes.
Yeah, as I had mentioned, we wanted to cast as broad a net as possible. Clearly, we wouldn't want to change the operating hours of Blackberry Farm for electrical vehicles, so we would modify the RFP before it goes out to change that from 24/7 to reflect the hours that the Blackberry is open. And then we could either remove it if that council's desire was to remove it as a facility, replace it with an alternate facility, or leave it in and allow the vendors to tell us what's viable and what's not.
So when would the time be to do that? Would that be right now or at some point in the future?
That would be now.
Okay. Briefly on the concerns regarding handicap spaces, would electric charging affect the handicap requirements? And perhaps that's a question for the city attorney, but
I'll start. I think the building code requires that electric vehicle charging stations provide accessible spaces as well. So that there'll be accessible electric vehicle charging stations as well as the appropriate number of accessible spaces in general.
Great. I'm going to hold myself to these 2 minutes. So let's go back around. I wasn't really getting a full temperature of council with regard to how to proceed. I seem to have heard one council member state that there was a desire to move this to a future meeting, and another council member seemed to indicate a willingness to move forward, but I didn't really get a full sense of the five of us. Let me try to see if we can do another kind of cleanup around here, and please try to be as brief as you possibly can. And with the idea being, let's try to get some resolution here so we can move on with these other few items that are on our agenda tonight. So, Councilmember Moore, you were the person I was referring to that it sounded like you wanted to get a little bit more of a referral back from staff based upon the input tonight. Is there anything that you have to add to that?
Yes, I'm actually just located an article talking about how various cities are adopting their electric vehicle charging station policies. So I would actually like to hear a little bit more about how the infrastructure rollout is going to be happening here in the future, because I think it might actually be interesting to have them at some of the city parks for people who are coming for a soccer game. And some of these, having had a kid doing the competitive soccer thing, when you traveled 2 hours for a game, you pretty much want to charge your car, and if you're at the game, that would be awesome. So I think I'd like to see what other cities are doing. Some are using streetlights, et cetera, for on-street charging. So I just don't feel like I have enough information to feel comfortable with this
Okay,
item.
understood. Councilmember Woolley, and then we'll go back to Vice Mayor Chow and Councilmember Way.
Yeah, the question that I was going to ask, and one is security. Mayor already took care of that. The cost for charging, if the city is running the ones next to City Hall, and yet now we're going to be outsourcing these, it just seems to me that there's going to be a pretty big delta between those. The cost to install EV chargers from scratch, pulling a number out of the air, say $50,000, could be more, might be a little less. And now that has got to come out of the money that the operator makes off of it. That just kind of indicates to me there's going to be a pretty big delta. Is that true or not true? Our units got installed with grant money. That's the first question. Then I have one other.
So my experience is that there is a market for electric vehicle charging stations. I've done fairly large installations where the rent has been paid for the use of simple parking spaces. So there is, if there's enough intensity of use for electric vehicles, as there might be in a city like Cupertino, where there's adoption of electric vehicles, there, especially at facilities that like community centers where you have a big draw, there may be enough viability there to take it on. That's why we're asking the vendors to do that assessment. They'll be able to do the market study and tell us what makes sense.
Okay, so the last comment is kind of maybe more for the mayor. I share Councilman Moore's concern about that we really should have a policy, both a better policy on contracts and then a policy on our EV desire. But here we are at a juncture where climate change is coming like a railroad train down the tracks, and I'd like to not see us wind up being delayed. To allow Public Works to go ahead and get their RFP, we definitely have the ability to change it in many different ways once it's done, but several months of time, I think, could help us move forward with this. I think Tesla believes that Silicon Valley is kind of the capital of the EVs. You see them all over the place. And so for us to start adapting as soon as we can, I think is pretty important. So I would be okay with moving forward with something tonight.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Woolley. Next we have Vice Mayor Chow.
I'm happy to make a motion on that. I'll just make a motion to approve the staff recommendation with the following modification. Changing the Blackberry from parking lot to the Monta Vista Rec Center, and locate EVCS spots in different locations from existing EV charging stations if possible, and include the rental fees the city is waiving for the use of city property for charging station in the contract, and bring the item back when a vendor is selected, and update the council on the selection process and the final contract. That's my motion.
Okay, Vice Mayor Chow has a motion. Would anyone like to second it? I see Councilmember Woolley, your hand is raised. Did you want to second this motion?
Yeah, I think that's good enough.
Okay,
Thanks.
there's a motion, it's on the table, and there's a second. Councilmember Moore, and Vice Mayor Chow, did you have any follow-ons to your motion, or was it?
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment that I think we are expressing concerns about contract. It has nothing to do with our support of electric charging station and the move to electric cars. But then, even though we know climate action is important, we expect more. We know that this is important, but still we want to make sure that the city, when we have a contract that is trying to improve the contract. And as for Councilmember Moore's concern about the contracting process, I understand that this is a 10-year contract, and if it doesn't work out, I think when we terminate the contract includes the removal of these stations. I think that in the future we will install more charging stations, and at that time, hopefully, then we would use the new adopted policies. But I think it would take time to adopt policies. It's a good idea to have EVCS policies. Probably other private entities would install them. So, but I think let's move on this item and then continue to improve our process.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Chow. Before we go back to Councilmember Moore, we'll go back to Councilmember Wei, who hasn't spoken second time yet.
Yes, may I have two questions. May I have a repeat of the motion?
Sure.
Second,
Okay, go ahead. What was your second question?
I'd like to ask, I'd like to ask Direct Molly, at the change of location, is there any issues, or why was the first solution, Blackberry phone was selected, and why was this not selected? Is there or can we do both?
We can do both. We can do one or the other. We'll do the evaluation on whatever council directs. There's no preference from staff's perspective. And if this is wildly successful, we may come back in a future date with other locations as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. And Madam City Clerk, could you read back the motion?
Yes, I mean.
Share my write-up if that's helpful.
Sure, Vice Mayor Chow, go ahead and share your screen again. That's fine. And we can see if City Clerk's recording of your motion is consistent with what you have written here. Madam City Clerk?
You want me just to confirm?
Well, yeah, you should be taking the motion, right?
Yes, that is correct, accurate. Did you?
Okay. I thought you were saying my statement that you should be taking the motion as accurate. Okay, so what you see on the screen is accurate, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So we have a motion on the table and a second. There are a lot of hands raised actually. So Vice Mayor, as well as Councilmember Moore, as well as Councilmember Wei and Councilmember Willie now. Vice Mayor's hands down. Councilmember Moore's hand is back up. I should probably weigh in on this, but I am counting votes. Seems like there are 3 votes that are willing to go forward. I am kind of compelled with regard to the idea of having a cohesive policy with regard to chargers, because that might affect how we proceed. But at the same time, with the willingness to go forward, it's something that I think that if Public Works has come back at us to approve a contract, there is a check in that as well. So there's going to be check in with council in the future. I do hope that there is a robust process that allows the public to have a number of choices through its staff to choose from, and hopefully there's some good transparency there. If staff could take a proactive approach to kind of communicating that with council members or a council member that has expressed interest in it, that would probably be a positive thing in the future. So those are my thoughts on this. I'm willing to support it. So let me go to Councilmember Moore again, then we'll go back to Councilmember Willie and then Councilmember Wei. Councilmember Moore.
Okay, so I'm thinking about equity and where these sites are within the city. And the Valco project should be completed. There's 6 to 8 years if they get going. In 2023, we're looking at about a 2030 completion. The gas-powered vehicles are going to be phased out in 2035. So at that one location, you've got 2,402 units. What is the EV charging requirement for that project? And if they're going to be, just for that one project, if they're going to be phasing out gas-powered cars, I'm thinking you're going to have a lot of vehicles there and residents who are going to be looking for a place to charge their cars, and instead we're looking at putting some charging stations over at Monte Vista. I know from owning an electric vehicle that I can just plug it in at home, and most everyone in my neighborhood is doing the same thing. You'll see the chargers right out front, and the cords. You can use a regular outlet now to charge your car, no problem. But if you're looking at people in apartments like this Valco project, east side of Cupertino, they might not have any place to charge their vehicle, and they're going to be looking for it. Are you going to have them go drive to Monte Vista?
I'm trying to find a nexus here, Councilmember Moore, too. Okay, so you're talking about an individual project.
Equity. So
Okay.
On the east side of Cupertino, you're going to have the bulk of your apartments, the bulk of your growth. Where are people going to go charge? So I'm thinking that these charging stations, putting it out at Monte Vista, that's great. That's great. What are we doing for the people on the east side of Cupertino who are living in apartments, don't have these chargers? How are we helping them?
Okay. Well, thank you, Councilmember Moore, for the comment. And let me go and call on Councilmembers Willie and Councilmember Way. Councilmember Willie.
Yeah, another technical question for Director Morley. And so Monte Vista Rec Center has very little parking. You know, it is a big sport, Monte Vista Rec Center. It's a big sports venue place, so our family does go there. Parking is a challenge. I'm almost always needing to park on the street. Question is, if you put the charging stations in that small parking lot, do people get fined if they park in the EV charging spot and they're not an EV? Again, because there's so little parking. Next question, can you put those chargers on the street like they are here at City Hall so that you're not going to impact what little parking is inside for that Monte Vista Rec Center?
So the city has flexibility. The city has flexibility to allow for parking, for shared parking. So the spaces could be shared for electric vehicle use or for general parking, or we can restrict it to one or the other. And yes, we can park on the street like we did at City Hall. And it's not as ideal, but it is a possibility. And with respect to private property and parking, the building code does have a requirement for a percentage of the parking spaces to be dedicated to EV parking and percentage additional allocation above the dedicated for EV parking. So the building code is catching up with the need to have those spaces.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Councilmember Willie. Let's go on to Councilmember Way and then Vice Mayor Chow.
Yeah, so I have a very brief question. I do think the Blackberry Farm location is very good because a lot of people park there, and I don't see why we are taking it off. If we want to add Monte Vista, we can do that. And then when the contract comes back, maybe give the council a little bit more options to choose the locations. So I would recommend that we make a friendly amendment, add Blackberry Farm back into the contract, just so that we can have options.
Okay, I'll take that as a friendly amendment to the motion. And so, Madam City Clerk, can you remind us who the movement was? Was that Vice Mayor Chow, seconded by Councilmember Willie?
That is correct, Mayor.
Vice Mayor Chow, do you accept that as a friendly amendment to your motion?
No, No, but I have an amendment that I'd like to propose.
Okay, well, let me go in order here. I think you are probably next. So what's your amendment to your motion?
Okay, so I would like to just drop the 6 location Blackberry Farm and not add Monta Vista Rec. I initially added that because I thought to be equitable on some on each side, but if Monta Vista Rec is not the best location, maybe we should reconsider. But I would like to add a sub-item, which is that we should refer the item to planning or Parks and Rec for to identify future EV charging stations in the next phase.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Vice Mayor Chow. And let me understand what you're doing your motion. So you're removing all 6 locations, is that right? Or are you just removing the
5.
one? I'm sorry?
I'm removing Blackberry Farm, so we would have only 5 locations
I see.
in the RFP.
Okay, so you're removing Blackberry Farm and you're also removing the Monta Vista Park location and asking for a referral to both the Parks and Recreation Commission and the Planning Commission. Is that correct? With regard
For
to
future ones,
for
not
future
this.
sites. Okay, understood. Councilmember Willie, would you accept that as the seconder of this motion?
I'd like to comment and not second it yet. I think Director Morley really kind of answered my questions about the limited parking. The equity, I think, is an appropriate consideration. Get EV chargers dispersed in the community, and so by all means, if at Monta Vista they put them on the street like they are here at City Hall, I think that really does take care of that and allows that side of the city to have some somewhat nearby chargers that they could go to. So for the time being, I'd like to not remove it. Maybe back to Vice Mayor Chow to say again if she still feels it needs to be removed.
I'm sorry, are you asking not to remove Monta Vista Park from that list? Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so you want to keep Monta Vista Park
But
back on? Okay.
if Vice Mayor Chow still has a compelling reason, I do think we need to move forward. So.
Okay. Well, let's go back to Vice Mayor Chow then. So, Vice Mayor Chow, are you willing to keep Monta Vista Park on your list of 6? And let me check with Councilmember Woolley. Are you okay with the referral to the commissions with regard to future sites?
Yeah, I'm always in favor of using our commissions to help us out.
Okay, so it's a streamlined question, Vice Mayor Chow. Are you willing to keep Monta Vista Park on the list?
So initially I suggest just dropping it because of the comment that location, not many people would be able to use it. I did take my kids for classes there, but so how often? But then there's if Monta Vista, if that can be installed on the street side, maybe. I just think that more community input is needed on this location. That's why I thought we don't have enough information to decide.
Yeah, let me do this. Okay. So, Councilmember Willie, I will go ahead and second that if you're uncomfortable seconding the removal of Monta Vista Park as one of the sites, just to move this forward.
I like to be the for some
Okay.
technology-wise, I like moving forward.
Okay.
And so if it means missing out on one, but I do like the concept that we're trying to spread EV chargers throughout the city. And so maybe Director Morley can, be keeping that in the back of his head for how to keep adding chargers.
Of course, for the time being. So presumably, if there's a referral to the Parks and Recreation Commission as well as Planning Commission, they'll be considering, for instance, Creekside Park or perhaps Wilson Park or the other parks on the other sides of town. So okay, well, the motion on the table is the 5 sites, absent either Monte Vista Park or Blackberry Farm, and a referral to both the Parks and Recreation Commission and the Planning Commission to come back with future sites. Is this workable for staff? Is that something that you guys can follow up with?
Yes, Mayor, that's perfect.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Director Morley. And I do see several hands still raised from my colleagues. And so Vice Mayor Chow has put her hand down. Councilmember Moore, you have the hand raised, and you currently are the final hand raised on this item.
Okay, thank you, Matt. I have a question about the charging speed. Are we looking at like the 6, I believe it's kilowatts per hour rate? Is that correct?
Yeah, so we've asked for level 2 and level 3 charging stations as the primary. So the fast charging is a level 3, so the ones that are particularly quick. And then the level 2 is typically what you see and what we have at City Hall currently.
Okay, so you would have some level 3s, you're saying?
So that will be part of we've asked for that in the RFP as being desirable, and that will be part of the proposal that we'll work through. The level 3 takes a tremendous amount of electricity in order to power the station, so that creates trade-offs. So that will be part of the business model that the vendors are looking at. How much power do they have to bring in, and what is viable for a particular location.
Okay, and do you know the kilowatts per hour on a level 3?
I don't have it off the top of my head here. Just looking for
I'm going to assume it's about the 75 would be my guess. Could be wrong.
The level 3 chargers come, I believe, at several different kilowatt levels. And again, we would look to the vendors to provide the best opportunity. We'll do the evaluation, and it's really a comparison between what the vendors are providing as proposals.
Okay, the reason being is that in the scenario where you have someone who might have traveled here and they're needing a full charge, a level 2 is not going to really get them anywhere except to a better charging station. So I personally don't want to see a lot of these level 2s. I would want to see predominantly level 3 because of the length of time required. Also, with regards to equity, I would want to see something at Creekside and Wilson. And since there is being this addition, I believe that's still in the motion to have Monte Vista. I think in all fairness, there should be some consideration on the side of the city, which is accepting the bulk of the density.
Monte Vista is not in the motion, Councilmember.
It's out. Okay, but still, I think we need to look at the east side of Cupertino. It's going to be quite a challenge. And that 2035, it seems a long way off, but it isn't. Okay.
No, it's a blink of an eye, really. So, okay, great. So, Director Morley, real quick question. In terms of the Public Works Department, are we looking at future changes to our electrical infrastructure? I know it's not, our purview for the PG&E utility or, possibly one could argue SVCA, but does Public Works have its eye on anything? I know that they're looking at the parking lot here in the Civic Center, right, for potential solar panels and battery backup. But anything that we're looking at? I mean, I hear Palo Alto talks about its transformers a lot these days because quite a few people have adopted electric cars, and the electrical grid that they own, they have their own utility, just isn't sufficient. So, I mean, if we're talking about level 3 chargers on a city level, and a number of level 2 chargers are going to be adopted. On a monthly basis constantly as people started adopting electrical cars. I mean, are we ready? Is there a plan?
Yeah, so PG&E definitely has the capacity to provide it on a grid level. From a availability of power, there's not an issue. The question becomes the transformer that's nearest to the site that you want to provide the power. And if that transformer is not sized at the right level, then that has to be upgraded, and that creates the cost. Right. That's why having a vendor come in and do that analysis for us is beneficial. We don't have to spend the cost to have it engineered. We can have somebody else do that analysis to see what makes sense from a business model perspective. So they'll do that. They'll look at the sites. They'll look at the grid capacity in that area and determine what makes sense in terms of number of chargers.
Okay. And as to my question, the infrastructure?
The infrastructure is in good condition for all of our facilities, and we're in good shape.
All righty. Okay. We'll see in the future. Councilmember Moore, your hand's back up.
Thank you, Mayor Paul. Matt, is there any grant money? It sounded like there was grant money before, and this is part of our infrastructure. It would be great if there was an outside source to assist with this, if we're needing to do the transformer aspect.
We'll always look for grant funding opportunities, and we'll work with any selected vendor to identify grant funding. EV charging grant funding is sometimes available for level 3 chargers. So if we're able to partner with them and take advantage of that, we would do so.
Okay, great. Well, just a really quick follow-up question along those lines then. Madam City Manager, what is the status? We're using a grant consultant right now, aren't we? I mean, how's the interface there? Maybe a TBD. Maybe that could be a follow-up.
Mayor Paul, I believe that's a TBD. I don't know if we are moving on that direction, and this is something I don't have information provided for you. But along that line, I do have a question for the motion on the table to bring is it the RFP to Planning Commission and Parks and Rec Commission for review, or the actual installation of the future EV charging station? That wasn't clear to me.
I took it to mean recommended site selections in the future. I don't know
Just
if
the site selection.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Vice Mayor Chow.
Just a site selection. So here is amended motion. So I changed the first one, added the last one. Charging station locations. You want me to just input on the locations, not the contract.
Right, but vis-a-vis the contract that they're talking about right now, are you asking them to be part of the process for this particular contract?
No.
Okay.
So
yeah,
the update is directly to the council.
Okay. Just want to be mindful that the EV charging stations are under AB 1236 for a streamlined process. So the local jurisdictions reviews are pertain to safety and health standards. Just wanted to put it out there. Council will remember that you adopted a new EV charging station ordinance about 2 council meetings ago. That's more for the private property, but also applies to public facilities.
Okay, so this is given upshot. So there are 6 being proposed here. What are you saying with regard to the?
I just want to be mindful that the Parks and Rec review and the Planning Commission review would not add any additional.
Well, I think you're misunderstanding the intent here. This is not a review of the sites that are already selected. These are recommendations from the Parks and Recreation Commission and the Planning Commission for future sites.
Beyond the 5?
Yes.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, just to answer your base question, it was not contemplated by Vice Mayor as part of the motion that they insert themselves into the review process here. So, okay. All right, good. Council Member Moore and then Vice Mayor Chow. And then we really have to wrap, folks. I mean, we can't just spend indefinite amounts of time on this one.
Okay, I would like to follow up on what the city manager just said. I'd like to have that explained again. So when we've approved it, it sounded almost like if a vendor comes in, say, next to the library and they're going to add in their new stations, that they can basically ministerially get that approval and put them wherever they like, and that we're out of the loop on design. And because when I look at where those already are, I would assume that while we might want new ones to be located against the fence in a different location, we might end up with the vendor saying, well, it's easiest for me to just continue along this string of this row, whereas that might not be what we want. So do we have any say-so for where they go? Thank you. Sorry about the rhyming.
Yeah, so I mean, with respect to chargers that are on city property, we have control over the use of city property. With respect to chargers that are on private property, there's a streamlined process, and we can look at them for health and safety, basically building code type requirements. But it doesn't foreclose the city's ability to in this case, charge a vendor to access city property and have some control over the where and how and what kind of equipment is installed.
Okay, Vice Mayor, I'm going to call a question unless you have
I just want to amend to clarify. This is referring to stations are identified on city properties. So it has
Understood.
nothing to do with the streamlined process for installation of private property.
right. You're
That's
talking
the
about
motion.
future
Yeah.
Councilmember Moore, yes.
Yeah, thank you. So I had no support in having chargers put at Creekside. Is that correct?
That would be considered when the Parks and Rec consider, right? I'm open to say consider Parks and Rec as future locations. Would that be, if we add this, would you support that?
I don't see how this changes the motion
I
function.
think Councilmember Moore would like to be sure that Creekside and Wilson Parks are considered the next round as potential locations for EV charging station, right?
I don't think it makes any difference, Vice Mayor Chow.
No?
It seems like
Okay.
Councilmember Moore is agreeing with that. So we have a motion. If you want to scroll down to clarify what's on the table here. And I'm going to go ahead and call this question. So motion's on the table for item number 11. Madam City Clerk, can you please, that motion was moved by Vice Mayor Chow and seconded by Councilmember Willie. Please conduct a roll call vote.
Mayor, I just want to make sure that the last bit that the vice mayor added on city properties, is that acceptable for the movement?
Oh, okay.
Okay,
So
the
Vice Mayor
seconder.
was the move-in, and then Councilmember Willie, are you okay with adding that language on city properties?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Moore?
Aye.
Councilmember Way?
I
Councilmember Willie?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Chow?
Aye.
Mayor Paul?
Yes.
The motion as amended carried unanimously.
Okay, thank you very much. We're on to item number 14, and item number 14 is an amendment title 16, Buildings and Construction. I believe this is the second reading of the ordinance. Yes, it is. Of the Cupertino Municipal Code, adopting the California Building Standards Code and Fire Code as mandated by the state of California, and making local exceptions to those standards as warranted. And so we have recommended action in the agenda. Madam City Manager, is there any presentation here other than the fact that this is second reading of an ordinance that passed in first reading, or at least was, that passed the first reading. And so let me see if there are any members of the public that would like to speak on this item number 14. Seeing no hands raised, are there any blue cards for item number 14, Madam City Clerk?
No, Mayor.
Madam City Clerk, could you please conduct the second reading of ordinance number 22-2245?
This is the second reading and enactment of ordinance number 22-2245, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Cupertino amending chapters 16.02, 16.04, 16.06, 16.16, 16.20, 16.24, 16.28, 16.32, 16.40, 16.42, 16.54, 16.58, 16.62, 16.64, and 16.68 of Title 16 of the Cupertino Municipal Code, adopting the California Building, Residential, Electrical, Mechanical, Plumbing, Energy, Fire, Historical Building Code, Fire, Existing Building Code, Green Building Standards Code, Reference Standards Code, Uniform Housing Code, and Property Maintenance Code, with certain exceptions, deletions, modifications, additions, and amendments.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move this, that the ordinance number 22-2245 be read by title only, and that the city clerk's reading constitute the second reading thereof. I will also, in this motion, move that ordinance number 22-2245 be enacted, and that we find the project is exempt from CEQA pursuant to 14 California Code of Regulations, sections 15061B3 and 15308. May I have a second for this motion? Councilmember Willie seconds. All right, so any discussion from council? Go by show of hands. All right, there are no hands raised. And so, Councilmember Moore, did you want to discuss? I already asked if any members of the public have any comments or blue cards, so. Anyone? Okay, seeing none, let's go ahead and conduct a roll call vote on this second reading.
Councilmember Moore?
Aye.
Councilmember Way?
I
Councilmember Willie?
Hi.
Vice Mayor Chow?
Aye.
Mayor Paul?
Yes.
The motion carries unanimously.
I'm going to go ahead and ask that we take item number 17 out of order because I think we can, or I'm sorry, item number 16, so that we can take a quick break, hopefully, before 15, and then just finish up on SB 9. Item number 16 is a city work program item. Are we okay if we take it briefly out of order? I see one nod from Councilmember Willie. And to signpost this, I'm just going to go ahead and, if we do take it out of order, recommend a couple of people to sit on that subcommittee and hopefully forego the rest of it so that we can focus on SB 9 for the rest of the evening. Is that something that people would be willing to? I'm going to go ahead and move that to move 16 before 15. And Councilmember Willie, would you second? You are nodding. We'll need an affirmative.
Yes.
Consent. Okay, thank you. Any members of the public like to speak to that? Item 16 before item 15. I don't see any hands raised. Any members of council like to speak to that? Okay. Madam City Clerk, could you take a roll call vote on taking item 16 before item 15?
Councilmember Moore?
Aye.
Councilmember Way?
I
Councilmember Willie?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Chow?
Aye.
Mayor Paul?
Aye.
The motion carries unanimously.
Okay. My suggestion is that for item number 16, that we nominate a couple of people from council to form that subcommittee to appoint those two council members to guide the final candidate selection process for our upcoming summer internship program for summer 2023, which is part of the work program. And I thank City Manager's Office and Astrid for putting together a very good staff report. I think that it makes sense to have the pool of consideration be from Councilmember Moore, Councilmember Way, and Vice Mayor Chow. And so if people have a particular preference, I'm more than happy to nominate those two in particular. Councilmember Moore, you have a hand raised. Did you want to serve on the subcommittee?
No, I actually wasn't volunteering. I would like the subcommittee to also be tasked with looking over the policy and making recommendations for it. There were some things in the policy which I thought needed some consideration.
Policy for summer interns?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Sounds good. Then I'll go ahead and ask Vice Mayor Chow and Councilmember Way, would you be willing to serve on this subcommittee with regard to assisting in the selection of the summer interns for the upcoming program, as well as working on policy as articulated by Councilmember Moore? Councilmember Way?
I'll be happy to, because I do have some recommendations as Councilmember Moore suggested on the policies too.
Okay, wonderful. Vice Mayor Chow, are you willing to serve? And Vice Mayor Chow, yes.
Yes, I'm happy to serve. I also would like to the committee to consider adding college interns as mentors for high schoolers, because council members are already volunteers for the job, and to work with high schoolers who might need a lot more guidance. If the city could also include the college intern to work together with high schoolers, that would be great. And I hope that the subcommittee would also consider involving commissioners as mentors for high schoolers, explore how that could be implemented.
Yeah, Vice Mayor Chow, I actually, as a person who formed the work program item in the first place, I think that it's important that we focus on the high school student population, because over the years, there have been many high schoolers that have reached out and asked for student internship possibilities. And I think that with regard to that, that's really what I was, kind of forming the possibility for. I think once you open it up to college interns, it changes the dynamic fairly significantly of the program. And also with regard to the high school experience and making sure that there's that exposure to civics and the local civic life, I think that's a very different type of dynamic than if you're talking about the college internship field, which is a much broader and diverse set of opportunities for college students, which is why I was envisioning it really more for the high school students.
I think you misunderstood me.
Okay.
The program is for high school students, but then I have worked with high school students. Some are very independent, some need a lot of guidance. And so I think if we could have college students whose job is to work with this high school student, then that would relieve a lot of council members' time. So that this will be a better program. So the program is for high schoolers.
Okay, understood. Okay, thank you for clarifying. And I will note that one of the earlier items had to do with legislative aid, and that should alleviate some of the burdens on the council commitments as well, hopefully in the future. So Councilmember Moore, your hand is raised.
Okay, thank you. So have our interns been sent for fingerprinting and all of notifying facilities if the intern needs a building key card? These are interns as young as 14. Is that?
Yeah, I believe so. I think we have our director of admin services here.
Okay.
So in terms of, well, I could refer this to the city manager as well, but in the past summer internship program, we did have our summer interns be processed through administrative services, and I believe, I don't know if it included fingerprinting, but Director Alfaro, your camera's now on. Did you want to speak to that question from Councilmember Moore?
Yes, that does include fingerprinting for the interns. Also, if any forms need to be filled out by their parents for some of the younger interns as well.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. And so let's go, we don't have a motion on the table on the item yet, but let's go to members of the public to see if anyone, and did anyone want to speak briefly from staff? Head shake, okay, great. So let's go to any members of the public that have comments on item number 16. And I don't see any hands raised, so let's go ahead and, okay, great. So Jennifer, come on up, and I think you fill out your blue card afterward, and so you'll go ahead and have your 3 minutes to speak on this. Welcome back live.
Sorry. Darcy, looks like you're running an IT department.
Welcome.
It's good to see you with computers. I was going to say, when I was in high school, there was a program called Work Study, and I worked from Homestead. I worked several summers with Work Study. I was actually at the NASA program at Ames for 2 summers. And I think that your problem may be solved here. Any of the high school students that are coming out of our local high schools have work study available to them during the summer, and they have staff members from the district so that they could be assigned to a work study program for summer, and they get units and they get references for their job eventually placement. And then you guys could work with the work study coordinator from the district, and then whatever positions that you had available, then that could be coordinated with the high school. So and it's very, very valuable. I mean, you learn a lot even if you have a 14, 15, 16-year-old, they learn responsibility. They learn, you don't just give them card keys. They have to learn responsibility, and that's why they have programs like that. De Anza has programs like that, but if you're starting at the high school level, that you can work with the work study program. Very, very valuable program they have, and it's very well staffed at Fremont High School. I know, because I lived through it for 2 years. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. I remember work study as a program when I was in high school. It's been probably 25 years since I heard the phrase, actually, but yes, more than that, in fact. Interesting suggestion, and I think that may be a great point of synergy for the subcommittee to be investigating, as a potential cooperation point with the Fremont Union High School District. So, okay, great. We are back here after our public comment. I'm going to go ahead and put a motion on the table with regard to the staff recommended item, action for item number 16, I should say, with our subcommittee designees being Vice Mayor Chow as well as Councilmember Wei. May I have a second for this motion? Vice Mayor Chow, your hand is raised, and so go ahead and call on you. Would you like to second this motion?
Happy to second, but I have something to add.
Okay, please.
So I would like to add that the subcommittee would review existing guideline and propose revision and consider adding college intern as mentors for high school interns, consider commissioners as mentors too, and consider existing work-study program with Fremont Union High and the other college.
Yeah, I have no, well, I think the key
Consider
word there.
doesn't mean we have to do it, just consider and then propose to the council.
Right, exactly. That's what I was about to say.
Yeah.
The key word is consider in each of these. So, okay, so I will go ahead and accept that as a set of friendly amendments to the motion, and presumably as a seconder, you do accept that, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So, Councilmember Moore, your hand is raised.
I'd like to see the motion again, please.
Okay, can you put that back up, Councilmember Vice Mayor Chow? So it's the staff recommendation in addition to the recommendation of Vice Mayor Chow and Councilmember Wei, which is indicated there, along with the review of existing guidelines and proposed revisions, which I think is the suggestion from you, Councilmember Moore, and then the other three are considerations by the subcommittee of these three areas: college interns, having commissioners as mentors, as well as this idea for work-study program collaboration.
Okay, an issue I have with considering commissioners as mentors too. So we have now a situation where the interns are they're being fingerprinted. What is the purpose of the fingerprinting? Are they doing a background check? And then what's the difference for the requirements on the interns versus the commissioners? Because I don't recall that commissioners had to be fingerprinted.
I don't recall getting fingerprinted
and had
either
a
as a
background
commissioner.
check. So it seems almost like we've got a disparity here.
So I take it that question is directed at staff. So we'll go to either City Manager Wu or Director Alfaro. Okay, Director Alfaro, take it away. Why do we fingerprint teenagers?
It runs a somewhat of a background through the Department of Justice just to make sure nobody has been convicted of any crime, so nothing hits back on that report.
And are we fingerprinting our commissioners these days, Sue? Or
No, neither do we fingerprint the council members either.
okay. Interesting. Councilmember Moore?
Thank you. Okay, so this actually brings up something, maybe I'll put it in the future agenda items. I have long wondered why none of the commissioners or the city council are having background checks.
Okay, let's save that for the end.
Thank you.
Well, that's a fair point. You know, it's a good enough question. Okay, so Vice Mayor Chow, you have your hand raised now.
So, do we fingerprint city staff and background check?
I think the answer to that is yes, of course. But let's go ahead and Director Alfaro.
The fingerprinting and background check is just following existing standards for employees.
That's correct.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I mean, I know I've been fingerprinted for something related to, elected office here, but it was probably related to one of the committee assignments, I would think. So, okay, well, let's go ahead and focus on the motion on the table. And any further comments? Councilmember Moore, your hand is still raised. Did you want to follow on? Councilmember Willie is not making any indications, neither is Councilmember Wei or Vice Mayor Chow. So let's go ahead and take a roll call vote on this item number 16. Thank you.
Councilmember Moore?
Aye.
Councilmember Wei?
Aye.
Councilmember Willie?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Chow?
Aye.
Mayor Paul?
Yes.
The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, Madam City Clerk. We're at 11:03. Let's go ahead and reconvene at 11:08, and we will finish the last enumerated item on this agenda. That's item number 15. Thank you very much. We'll see you in 5. Is item number item number 15 on our agenda. That is consideration of an ordinance to implement state legislation, SB 9, that provides for ministerial approval of up to 2 units and or a lot split in a residential single-family zone. Madam City Manager, I understand that we're looking at either a foregone or a deeply abbreviated staff presentation here because we have all the materials. This has been thoroughly considered in the past with our urgency ordinance and a follow-up study session. And so is there any presentation from staff at this point?
We do have a presentation prepared, and it's also included in the presentation packet provided to council earlier. Staff can definitely walk the council through the high points,
okay,
and kind of conclude our presentation, possibly state the recommendation.
Sure.
With the highlights that were brought up by Planning Commission.
I think I understand that there are 2 major points that we want to be going over. So why don't we take under advisement the materials that have been published and the prior meetings that we've had on this, and focus upon those points in the presentation.
Sounds great.
Sounds good. Okay,
so with
great,
that
thanks.
said, I'll turn it over to Acting Director Lou Connolly.
Okay, thank you, City Manager Wu, and good evening, members of the council, Mayor Paul. I just wanted to be brief with this item, and I will be turning it over to Planning Manager Pugh Ghosh and Assistant Planner Emi Sugiyama, who will be giving the presentation, and staff will be happy to answer any questions after that.
Great, welcome. Thank you, Luke, and welcome, Pugh. Welcome, Emmy.
Thank you. All right, and so we're just gonna go ahead and get started here. All right, so good evening, Mayor and council members. Emi Sugiyama, as noted, planning staff, and I'm going to be presenting the municipal code amendments for the implementation of Senate Bill 9. And so the proposed ordinance has standards that are based on the interim ordinance, which is set to expire on December 19th of this year. There have been minor clarifying edits that were made, as well as some additional terms defined in order to make sure that we are applying those standards objectively. Additionally, the more major modifications we made, which were based on your feedback as well as feedback from the public. And so today we're going to be going over 2 major modifications that were recommended by our Planning Commission, and those include our grade change limitations as well as our balcony limitations. So at their October 11th meeting, the Commission recommended that your council adopt the ordinance with revisions to the balcony provisions. That would be to disallow balconies in perpetuity on SB 9 units. That means that no subsequent development of balconies or additions of balconies would be allowed on any units that were proposed pursuant to SB 9. And they also recommended a revision to the grade change limitation that staff had provided. This is a limit now to the grade elevation of just 12 inches, regardless of the existing lot slope. So tonight, staff is recommending that you adopt the proposed ordinance as recommended by the Planning Commission, except for the recommendation of the grade change limitation standard. So in regards to that, this is applied originally through the interim ordinance with just a 6-inch limitation, and that applied to urban lot splits in the R1 and RHS zone. Based on our feedback and our review of various preliminary projects, and as we noted during your study session, this grade change limitation was pretty restrictive and wouldn't allow for a 20-foot deep garage on even a 5%, which is considered a moderate or small slope, because that would require at least a 1-inch cut into the ground. And again, that 6 inches would not be able to be met. And so with that, staff did prepare a revised recommendation, which had scaled limitations based on the lot's existing slope. And again, that Planning Commission did recommend that instead of that scaled limitation, there was a straight limitation, regardless of the lot slope, of just 12 inches. With regards to balconies, the interim ordinance disallowed these balconies. Again, they were allowed with subsequent development through either a discretionary review in the R1 zones or a building permit in RHS zones. However, under the proposed ordinance and with Planning Commission's recommendations, balconies are still not allowed. However, now it's in perpetuity, meaning that they would only be allowed on homes that are going through the discretionary process, which would not be an SB9 unit. And then just really quickly, staff does want to really quickly go over the accessory dwelling unit allowance. This is carried over from the interim ordinance, and it disallows ADUs on any property where both an urban lot split as well as one or more SB9 units have been proposed. And so with that quick kind of overview, we do recommend that the City Council find the proposed actions exempt from CEQA and adopt the proposed municipal code amendments. And that will conclude my presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Emmy. Before we go to any questions from the City Council, let's go to members of the public. And again, the order is going to be through Zoom, and then it will go to any blue cards. And thank you, Madam City Clerk. We have one member of the public from the Zoom function, Nidu Kohli, as well as here in Community Hall with blue cards, Nageshwara Rao Vempati and Jennifer Griffin. And so you'll have 3 minutes or up until the first person concludes speaking, whatever is longer. And so Nidu, welcome. Let me get my cursor here. May begin.
Hi, Mayor Darcy. Hello, council members. Thank you. This is Neetu and Tej Kohli. We decided to speak together.
Oh, great. Welcome.
Yeah, no problems. Man, you guys have stamina. This is amazing what you guys go to for keeping our city straight. I'd just like to make 2 quick comments. One, thank you very much for working with us. Thank you very much for taking the feedback from the study session that, all lots are not created equal in Cupertino and showing the flexibility. I mean, with 20,000 homes, I'm sure flexibility goes a long way. The only regret I have is that we started this in January and here we are in almost December before something gets approved. And all I ask is that when we do come back for discretionary approval of the designs that we're going to put on this, that the loss of time be taken into consideration. We'd like to move with speed. And it's not just me, it's everybody else that's also been waiting. The city staff has been extremely helpful. The Planning Commission has been extremely helpful. And the council has been extremely helpful. So thank you to listening to us. And we understand this is complex. We understand that we want to move carefully and not set something in stone that can't be changed. But thank you for working with us. That's all I wanted to say.
Great. Thank you very much, Nidu. And we greatly appreciate your patience, and hopefully we'll get you a good resolution here. So with regard to our next speakers, they are Nageshwara Rao Vempati and Jennifer Griffin, and we'll take another minute or so of Nagesh's commentary. Welcome. Thanks for waiting patiently this evening.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk. And I'm Nagesh Rao Vempati. I talked at the previous meeting as well. And I was the one who raised objection to primarily this grade problem of 6 inches. And my opinion, and I would like you to consider this very seriously, is that increasing that to 12 inches will not solve the problem. For a site that has a slope of 6%, you need more than a 12-inch grade change even to build a garage of 20 feet, let alone any living area. Anything more than that requires a further correction. Therefore, I strongly feel that the city planning department's proposal that a grade change is specific to the lot makes more sense. Allow up to a foot of grade change if the slope is less than 5%, and allow up to 2 feet of grade change if it is less than 10%. Or if the slope is more than 10%, then review with a civil engineer to say that you have minimized the amount of cut and grade change required. That makes more sense to me because a grade change is very individual to every lot, depending on the slope. And I would also recommend to allow balconies on these properties because they're going to be lots after all. And any modern house built requires some balconies. And my specific problem is also that we happen to have a lot that's empty, which is not usually the case. Therefore, we meet all the requirements laid out by the current ordinance except for this grade change. That just cannot be met because the lot has a slope. So I strongly recommend you consider the adoptable grade change permitted by the city planning, which says that do it according to the slope of the lot and according to what the city engineer says, as opposed to saying restricted to 12 inches because that just cannot be met in several of the lots. That's where I'm blocked. So that's
Thank
my
you very
request.
much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Nagesh. And Madam City Attorney, Madam City Clerk, are there any other blue cards at this point?
No, Mayor.
And did anyone send an email to cityclerk@cupertino.org?
No, Mayor.
Okay, so our next and final speaker on this item is Jennifer Griffin. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you, Mayor Darcy. I've attended all the meetings that the city has had since the SB 9 and SB 10 were signed by the governor a year ago. Both of these bills have generated a statewide ordinance called Our Neighborhood Voices that is hoping to override 9 and 10. I consider these two bills an absolute assault on our state local control. The governor has never met an ADU bill he did not sign. We don't know why. I suspect that there is dark money coming in, and I think it's going to the legislators, and I think it's going to the governor to push these bills. I'm throwing out there the housing bills, the lot splitting bills, and the ADU bills. The governor just signed the 2-story ADU bill. You can have an ADU that's 25 feet high anywhere in the state as of January 1st. No balconies. We have enough problems on a legitimate lot with balconies that are looking into neighbors, whatever. That in itself generates a lot of drama and time. The slope change, Berkeley right now in the fire zone, there are people in that city that are saying they have to have 2 ADUs in a burn zone. Okay, the city was forced to allow 1. Do these people not remember the fire in the Berkeley Hills? I will say right now, the YIMBYs are as naive as they come. They believe things that people tell them, but they weren't here when those hills burned. I find that appalling that anyone, Senator Wiener, I hate to say this, but he is a perpetrator. He's saying that they're supposed to allow this type of construction in burn zones. You are making areas that the residents have trouble exiting out of, and if you throw in more housing units in there, that adds 20 minutes evacuation time for the residents that are there. I know from the CZU burn fires in Felton and Santa Cruz, you can't throw ADUs in there. Getting back to what 9 is doing with the lot splits, you are setting up potential with grade changes. Yes, these 2 bills are big deals. They have caused this state to go into potentially forming an initiative that will override this. It is a big deal. The legislators know this and the governor knows it, and they are sure getting pushed back. I am not voting for that governor. I'm voting for a Republican. I don't want to, but I do not trust our governor.
Thank you, Jennifer.
He has no sense.
Thank you, Jennifer. So let's go back to council here. Are there any questions at this time on item number 15? And I don't see hands raised from our council at this time. So I do have one hand raised from Councilmember Moore as well as Councilmember Way now. And so Councilmember Moore, why don't you start us off? We're on a pretty constrained timetable here, and so I'm going to just advance notice. I'll keep a strict 2 minutes for these rounds. And so why don't we start with Councilmember Moore?
Okay, so on page 327 of the agenda packet, it states that this is about changes in grade. that where a retaining wall exceeds 5 feet in height, it requires that the retaining wall not be visible from the public right-of-way. Okay, so we now went from the Planning Commission suggesting 12 inches to having retaining walls at 5 feet in height, and I'm wondering how that is going to happen. So I'm a little surprised at that, because that's a pretty tall retaining wall, and I want to also clarify. I see 2,500 cubic yards in the municipal code. So is that for all sites, that all of these steeper lots? It's 2,500 total cubic yards that can be moved. Thank you.
Okay, I'll take that as a question directed towards community development, and or somebody who can speak to it from staff. So, Emmy,
I can respond to that. Okay. Yeah. So for the retaining walls, the 5 foot limit is just for when we would need it to be shielded or blocked from view. And that comes from a standard that's existing within our municipal code in a different title, Title 16. And that's from our grading requirements there. And so we just carried that over so it could be codified with the objective standards. So we ensure that it's going to be applied to these projects specifically. And then I said that hand was back up if you wanted to kind of follow up to that.
Yes, through the mayor.
Okay, go ahead, Councilman.
So there is no maximum. So 5 feet is not a maximum retaining wall. You could, I don't see a maximum. That's where you need to do the screening. That's where that comes in. But you could foreseeably have a 10-foot retaining wall, something like that, because we've gotten away from the 12 inches that recommendation from the Planning Commission. Is that correct?
Okay, just very briefly then, as a follow-up, I mean, I see Pew has her hand up as well. So, Emmy, did you want to follow up briefly, and then Pew, or?
Emmy, why don't you go ahead?
Oh, okay, great. Never mind. So we don't have a limitation strictly, but they do go through our city engineer, and they oftentimes will recommend that that's the minimum amount possible. However, that would be a determination on the city engineer at that point, because we cannot, we don't have that discretion on these kinds of permits. And if you wanted to add anything to that.
I did want to add something. Where we have discretionary approval, we do work with the applicants to make sure that retaining walls are not much taller than 5 feet. However, because we need objective standards for SB9 projects, we wanted to make sure that we at least had it codified to the limit that we want it at least to look nice or be shielded. But yes, there are no limitations, because pursuant to the city engineer, that may need to be taller.
Okay, thanks very much. Let's go on to Councilman Roy, you had your hand up. Did you want to follow up questions?
I just want to ask Mayor Pro, is this questions or comments? I have comments, I don't have questions. I want to compliment Pew. I asked a lot of questions. She already answered almost all my questions, but I do have a few comments for our ordinance.
Well, let's wait till we get our questions exhausted, and then we'll go to comments. And so, well, actually, let me check in with Councilman Woolley. Do you have questions or comments, or both? Question? Okay. Councilman Woolley, questions?
Yeah, so I think this one is for you. If she can go over in a little bit more detail the grade change, as we have a resident here with what appears to be a slope on his lot that is greater than what would be accommodated. It seemed to me that what the staff was proposing, that it's going to be, the amount of grade change is going to be relative to the slope on the lot. And would that take care of this residence issue if we did go with the staff's previous proposal?
With respect to the grading issue, yes. The short answer is yes. It would take care of this issue on that particular item.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So quick follow-up question on this. So with regard to the grading issue, how many homes in Cupertino would be impacted by the staff's recommendation as opposed to the Planning Commission's recommendation?
We don't have hard numbers, Mr. Mayor. However, it impacts pretty much everything that is west of Bub, I would say, because the grade beyond Bub, west of Bub Road changes pretty significantly rapidly.
Okay, and you don't have rough numbers as to how many homes we have west of Bub?
Not at this point, no.
Okay, okay. Okay, let's go on to Councilmember Moore again. Or Vice Mayor Chow, did you have anything before we go back to Councilmember Moore? No? Okay, Councilmember Moore.
Okay, so going back to this, the 2,500 square feet. So are you saying that, is there a limit on the amount of cut and fill, or is it because it's reading, I just need to clarify that. So I'm on page 373, site grading, cumulative total 2,500 cubic yards, cut plus fill. And is that for these sloped lots?
That's the cap on RHS lots, yes. And that, if you subdivide into two, it's still 2,500 for both the lots.
Okay, and who suggested the 2,500?
That's an existing cap that we have.
Okay.
So we're just carrying forward for SB9 projects as well.
Okay, so I'm just kind of wondering if somebody did a cut and fill example to see how quickly they got to 2,500 cubic yards.
2,500 cubic yards is quite a bit, but I don't think we have an example per se. We get about a maximum of about 30 cubic yards per truckload.
Yeah, so that's correct. I'm just doing some little rudimentary cross sections here, and okay, I'll go with the 2,500. All right.
But yeah, that includes driveways and other things as well. I did want to clarify that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Councilmember Moore. Councilmember Woolley, did you have any follow-ups at this time?
When we get to comments.
Okay, we're at comments. So let's go ahead and call on comments. I think Councilmember, let's start with Councilmember Way, since she didn't have the questions and wanted to give comments. Councilmember Way. And you need to unmute your microphone. You need to unmute yourself.
I did unmute myself. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
So I'm sharing a document. Can everybody see the documents?
Yes, yes, we can.
So I read this ordinance very closely, and I have a few questions. I guess we could, approve it and see how things go. But I really want to have these 4 questions to sort of have my fellow council members think about it. So, the standards that involve that we should do has no personal or subjective judgment by any public officials, and it should have external and uniform benchmark or criteria available as to how do we come up with this. So the 4 criteria I have questions are, I'm going to go a little faster because I know our time is short, but I do want to make one comment that on September 28th, when the planning staff hosted that community meeting, and they did do surveys. We have 101 attendees, and on the questions that I have on 1, 3, 4, all of the surveys have a majority are against what we're recommended right now. So I just want to make that one point. So the first one is, can you still see the what I'm sharing?
Yes.
The disallowance of second story and balconies. To me, this is, and also this, yes, I get that it's a one size fits all, but I don't agree anything with one size fits all. For example, if I do have a very big, we're talking about residence, a very big lot, and he or she just want to subdivide it into 2 units, and the deck and balcony only overlooks their own yard and with lots of privacy, I don't see why they should not have that design variance in order to, make it a little more attracting to them, or a little variation of designs. So I'm hoping there's some flexibility in this item. Instead of absolutely no, maybe we could have more objective standards to make sure that these balconies don't overlook any neighbors. The second one, I really have an issue on this one. The larger unit in a duplex development may not be more than 200 square feet larger than the smaller unit. I'm going to give you one example. Say you have a 5,000 square feet home, which is pretty often in Cupertino. And if you subdivide it, you say, I want to build a duplex. According to our standard 45 floor area ratio, we can accommodate a 2,250 square feet building space, including garage. So take 400 square feet of a two-car garage. Then that leaves about 1,850 square feet of a living space. Say this residence has 2 kids, wants to build a 2-bedroom, 2-bath home to accommodate a family, and then a smaller unit to accommodate a parent and in-laws. With this 200 square feet limitation, he can only build the maximum 1,025 square feet unit on one side and 825 on the other side. That is not going to accommodate a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. Once we remove this restriction, then he can choose to build a 1,250 square feet for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath and a 600 for the in-law. Why are we limiting this? I like to know the theory of limiting this. It limits our residents' ability to build something that they need, a family of 4 plus the in-law quarters. So I really think we should seriously consider this limitation. The third one is the 2,000 square feet per unit. I get it. And if 61% of residents think surveys that we shouldn't have done it. And say, okay, so I'm thinking, what's this going to affect? If a resident owns a 17,000 square feet lot, which I think on 10 tall, on some areas, they do have square feet like this big. And according to our regular code, 45% floor to area ratio, this resident can build a 7,600 square feet home if he builds a single family home. Say he wants to split it as AP9 into 2 units, take 800 square feet of the two-car garage, that leaves this resident 6,850 square feet of living space. But with the 2,000 limit, he can only build 2 units, each 2,000. So he's going to have 4,000 square feet of living space, and that doesn't maximize, what our regular 45% lot to area ratio.
Oh yeah.
So
Councilman White, if you can wrap just in.
I'm going to wrap that.
Okay,
So
thanks.
I'm going to just go to this one really fast. So what we're doing is forcing him to split lots and build 4 units, so that he can maximize his needs. Why are we doing that? We have plenty of lots that's 7,500 square feet and with a 3,000 square feet house on it. Say this person wants to build so that 2 siblings can live together and grow together, have ample space. I just feel this limitation also limits what our residents can do to accommodate them. I don't see why we have that 2,000 square feet limit on the units. And as for basement, I do think that basement, absolutely no basement, is also a pretty strict limitation. Say if you have an ACLA home, you want to be conforming to the neighborhood, but you have that space. So if you build a basement, it's not going to affect the height and the width of the building. You can still conform to the neighborhood. Why don't we allow that? So I'm just saying that these limits, that inflexibility, really bothers me in this SB9 ordinance.
Okay.
I'm good. Yeah.
Thank you, Councilmember White. And then we'll go to Councilmember Willie, followed by Vice Mayor Chow. And we're going for comments right now, so a little bit more latitude, but we'll try to get a motion on the table after this round of comments.
Yeah, so my main comment, I hear the resident and that while he'd like a balcony, and he might be very sensitive to his neighbors, but our ordinance really needs to cover the full spectrum. And just recently down in Rancho, we received a couple emails from different houses that were being built that are overlooking their neighbors. And it was the neighbors that are being overlooked that were notifying us that, wow, my privacy is gone. And so no disrespect to the very sensitive property owners that would, look to do the right thing. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people that are more profit-minded and are not concerned. And so now the point that I'll use to reference, when city staff brought this to us, I believe it was back in March. I didn't bring that PowerPoint today, but they showed some examples of lot splits. And when you split the lot, and if you do it with a flag lot, one in front of the other, you're moving essentially one of those structures to the backyard. And backyard now is going to be looking over the yards of the adjacent properties. This lot split type activity definitely increases housing production, and that's what we want. But we also want to be very sensitive to the people that are going to be impacted that are nearby. And when those adjacent properties go into their backyard, especially with small kids, these days, how much do we even let our kids play in the front yard? So the backyard is really the sacred spot, and they go in the backyard, only the houses that used to be in line with their houses are now an additional structure in the backyard. And so I really, as much as I would like to give as much flexibility, I have to err on the side of being conservative and sensitive to the possibilities that other people are going to be subjective to. So by all means, we're going to allow lot splits. We're going to allow two structures and two ADUs on a piece of land that was one residential unit previously. Wow, that's an amazing change. I think we need to be very careful. And that's not to say that we can't revisit it in 12 months or in 2 years. Let a few people come and bring us good cases where it did not impact the neighbors, that, wow, maybe in those instances we would allow balconies. But out of the gate, I think we do need to be sensitive. Build those structures, split the lot, take care of it. Yes, move forward. But we need to do it cautiously. And so I'll leave my comments at this point to that.
Thank you, Councilmember Woolley. Let's go on to Vice Mayor Chow.
Hi. So I think in the very first meeting, I already said that I would like to see the city have a discretionary lot split process to allow more units, which this kind of discretionary process would take into neighbor inputs and put in more consideration so that we have a better result. In this kind of discretionary process, we could allow more flexibility. However, SB 9 is not such a process. I think this is something a lot of members of the public doesn't understand. So I would like maybe the city staff or the city attorney could clarify. I think I know the answer, but I think it's for the benefit of the public. What's the difference between ministerial approval under SB 9 and for a discretionary approval, for example, for balcony? For a house with balcony, what's the difference?
So the major difference is that ministerial approval needs to be based solely on objective standards. So that's standards that are published in advance and decisions that can be made without really any judgment on a part of the decision maker. It's made at the staff level, and there's no appellate process. Discretionary review can be conducted at the staff level. It can also be conducted by the Planning Commission or City Council, and there is, subject to some limitations in state law, the ability to take into account more subjective concerns. The canonical one being neighborhood character, but also subjective concerns about neighborhood privacy, for example. And I think as we've discussed this before, really the purpose of the objective standards in this ordinance is to try to replicate some of the concerns that are addressed through the discretionary review process, but do so in a predictable way that's consistent with state law.
Yeah, thank you. So with the SB9 process, the neighbors wouldn't have no opportunity to provide input, no opportunity for appeal. Therefore, we are more careful and put in more restriction on this kind of standards. As for the 2,000 square foot, I think the purpose of SB9 is to produce units that's more affordable. 2,000 square foot, this kind of units are more affordable. That's the purpose of the state law. So I think we are trying to be loyal to the state law so we can incentivize more affordable units. And also I think this is something I asked the city staff, but maybe let's clarify that again. My understanding is after SB9 law split, the owner can still use a discretionary process to approve a house or duplex on a house on each of the lot. In that discretionary process, they can still put in balcony. Is that right?
Go ahead, Pew.
Sorry. So if you utilize the SB9 subdivision process, you have two pathways for moving forward from that. In one pathway, you could use the SB9 ministerial process to get 2 duplexes built on the site. However, you could also use the city's discretionary processes to build a single family home and an ADU on the site. If you went down the pathway of, as the ordinance is currently proposed, you could build the 2 duplexes under SB9 development, but you could not build an ADU on it. But under discretionary processes, you can.
Yeah, so the current proposed ordinance does allow balcony under the discretionary process after SB9 law split.
Correct. And Emmy, can you verify that?
I can confirm, yeah. So if you're doing a discretionary home, you can have a balcony, but not if you're having an SB9.
Yeah, great, thank you. And as for Councilmember Moore's comment about larger units cannot be more than 200 feet from the smaller unit, I think I concur with that. Is there any reason we are limiting that to 200, not 400 or 600? I'm curious about that.
I can help answer that. 200 square feet is roughly the size of one additional bedroom. The whole purpose of SB9 is to be able to generate potentially 2 primary units on the site. And if somebody did want to do what Councilmember Wei was suggesting, where you have a much smaller unit and a single family home, it would be more beneficial to somebody to utilize the discretionary processes because you could maximize your FAR further if you were to use the discretionary processes.
Right. Sorry. I would also add that there'd usually be benefit in that case to go through a process that involved a single primary dwelling unit and ADU. There are additional benefits that the applicant could get in that situation where that's, in almost all cases, that's going to be a favorable pathway.
Could we clarify in the city's instruction about this more favorable process so that people understand this 200 feet is not meant as a limitation, but it's there because there is a better path for them?
Well, I think people are pretty well aware of the ADU process. We certainly have people taking advantage of it.
Okay. Well, yeah, thank you, Vice Mayor Zhao. I haven't made comments yet. I think that we have done a good job in vetting this, and there have been a lot of various discussions. I actually like the staff recommendation. I think they, got it right on, both of the major items that we're, reviewing today. So I'm going to go ahead and move that. I'm going to move the staff recommendation, and I will seek a second. And I see Councilmember Moore, you have a hand raised, and your hand is no longer raised. Councilmember Way, are you willing to second staff recommendation?
I actually will second it and make a comment.
Okay. All right. So why don't you second? And I did see some hands raised as well. Councilmember Moore, your hand was raised. So why don't we go to Councilmember Way and then Councilmember Moore? And so with regard to the motion process, we have a motion and a second on the table. We're in discussion and open to any modifications or substitute motions at this time. So Councilmember Way.
So my comment is, I do agree there might be a discretionary process that people can use for the 200 square feet difference and the 2,000 square feet limitations. But my question is, what's the purpose? Why don't we give people the choice? And does this kind of provision, maybe this for Chris can, our attorney can answer it. Does it chill people from using SB 9? And I thought that could be a way that somebody can criticize our ordinance. That's my first question. The second question is, if 2,000 square feet limit to make the house more affordable, I have to respectfully disagree, because this is only affects 0.5% of the housing. The other 95.5% actually could probably be considered more affordable. And for a lot size this big, even it's only 2,000 square feet versus 3,000, I don't think there's going to be such a difference in affordability. And we should really depend on the other 95.95% that's really going to have more affordable housing under SB 9. So these are my, one is a comment, one is a question. Yes, we can say, don't use SB 9, use our discretionary process, then you can build what you want. Does that make our ordinance be a little less welcoming for people for SB 9? Would we be criticized for that?
Well, I mean, I can't predict whether people will criticize us for it. I mean, I can say that certainly the statute allows local jurisdictions to adopt objective standards for implementing it, and so this would definitely fall within that category. I would also say the idea that Pew articulated, that you're trying to get, relatively evenly sized, modestly sized units, is very much consistent with the intent of SB 9, which is to generate, this kind of, what's sometimes referred to missing middle infill housing that is modestly sized, hopefully more modestly priced than, a typical single family unit. And so it's consistent with sort of some of the policy goals of the legislation, and certainly this kind of objective standard is clearly authorized by the law.
Oh, thank you, Chris. I do get it. I understand the objectives is authorized by the law, but I just feel that I hope that our ordinance is well received and would not receive any legal challenge. That's just my comment, and I'm okay with it because I second it.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Moore.
Okay, I could probably simplify this by saying I'd like to see someone's cut and fill calculations that they did to come up with the 2,500 cubic yards for cut and fill, because I just kind of did a simple example. So balancing my cut on this side and my fill on the downhill side.
Sorry, Councilmember. If video
Yes.
could pan to the... Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks very much.
Okay, so very simply, I'm imagining a lot. It's got a slope of, let's see, it's 10 over 100. I've got a 10% slope lot, and I'm trying to figure out what the cut and fill is. I'm balancing it on the hillside, so I'm cutting on this side, this triangular section. I'm filling on the downhill side. So it's very simple. 1/2 the base times the height. Got 125 square feet. I'm doing a cut section that's 40 feet across on my lot. I end up with 5,000 cubic feet. I divide it by 27 and I get 185 cubic yards. I'm doing that for both. total of 370 only cubic yards. That's a 5-foot cut. So that's why I want to see somebody's math on this to understand how they came up with 2,500 as the goal. So hopefully I've got an error in my math, because I worked that problem backwards, and then I'm ending up with a couple of 17-foot retaining walls and still managing to be within your requirements. So could someone please, I'd like to take a moment, because otherwise I'm going to have to say no to this and look at something like a 2-foot retaining maximum. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Moore. Anyone
Mr.
from
Mayor,
staff?
if I may.
Yes, please. Go ahead.
So again, I do want to reiterate the 2,500 cubic yard limitation. It currently exists in the residential hillside code. It was adopted in 1993, and if it pleases the council to review and update that limitation, we can bring something back. We wanted it to be consistent with what is already in our code, which is why we wanted to carry that forward. I do want to reiterate the cut and fill is not just for the house itself, but it is also for all driveways and any flat areas that are associated with any development in the hills. So it's not just for the home. So it involves, and sometimes driveways in the hills can run for hundreds of feet. And in order to get cross slopes and other slopes that the fire department requires, you do need to have significant amount of cut and fill in order to do that. But with that said, I mean, I at this point, I don't know that I can vet the mathematics. If it pleases the council, it could certainly place a smaller limit on the cut and fill, but that would mean that we would probably have more cantilevered homes on stilts, and that is probably not something that is desirable either. This is an existing standard in our code that we're just carrying forward, and it's a maximum.
Okay, thank you, Pugh. And then before we go to Vice Mayor Chow, Councilmember Moore, you seem to have a follow-up to this comment.
Okay, so I would be willing to go to the 24 inches, possibly 36, but I can't follow the recommended action here. It's just the cubic yards are too large, and where we don't have the information that we need. So I would want to have seen some examples of what you end up with, because I'm ending up with, we don't have a limit on how high the retaining walls actually can be. We don't know that. And we don't have a solid example that we can follow for what that 2,500 actually looks like. So I do think it does need to be revisited, but if we're putting this in a discretionary, in a ministerial place, I can't go along with it. It's just too much. So I think that the Planning Commission made a very restrictive, they had the 12 inches, restrictive suggestion. I'm willing to go further, the 24 or 36, but I can't support this. Sorry.
Okay. Well, help me to understand the drawback here. If the amount that can be removed is too excessive, what's the danger? Just put it in plain language. Retaining wall too high. I mean, what are the,
You're altering the landscape significantly.
Okay, so that's the primary consideration.
You're beyond what I think should be in a ministerial approval, and so I think we need to look at that. We're going too far.
Okay, but it's still subject to environmental considerations, right? I mean, in terms of, if you run into, particular, limitations from an environmental perspective,
I think that when you're looking at that much earth movement on the site, that the aesthetics argument about that is not going to hold as a health and safety issue.
Okay. I hear what you're saying. Okay. Well, Pugh, your hand is still up. Did you have a brief follow-on, or was that artifactual from your prior comment?
No, I actually had a clarifying question, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to clarify whether your motion included the grade change limitation language suggested by staff, recommended by staff. So I just wanted to clarify
It does.
that.
Yes, it's the staff recommendation. So,
perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I know we're encompassing that discussion here, so. But, of course, it's not, it's not a voted on motion yet. So Vice Mayor Chow, followed by Councilmember Wei, and we can visit Councilmember Willie if he so chooses. Vice Mayor Chow.
Yeah, I said this in the meeting with staff, but I should repeat here. I really appreciate the staff for your thoughtfulness and thoroughness in considering many different options for this ordinance. It's a very complex one, and I really appreciate the different recommendations and options through the process. I think I understand the Councilmember Moore still has concerns, but like a lot of things we adopt, it's not set in stone. If it doesn't work, and just like the interim ordinance, we adopted something, and then we had comment flag lots should be added, and then this other thing. So we would adapt the policy. So even after we adopt one. So I think we should adopt the staff recommendation today and then continue to look at ways to improve it, and maybe some of the standards could be improved, and yeah, we should consider those. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Vice Mayor Chow. Councilmember Willie, did you want to weigh in before we go back to Councilmember Wei?
Okay, so I am concerned about going backwards, where I want to trust that when they came up with 2,500 cubic yards, that they really did look at the gamut of...
Councilmember Willie, I'm going to stop you there. Sorry. So for every 15-minute increments, we're at midnight, so I'm going to go ahead and just take a straw poll with the council, make sure that we're okay with proceeding for another 15 minutes. I'll start on my left. Councilmember Moore, are you okay with going till 12:15?
Yes.
Councilmember Willie?
Yes.
Councilmember Wei? Yeah, you're nodding your head. If you could just make a verbal assent.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Chow?
Yes.
Okay, I'm okay with it. So sorry to interrupt, Councilmember Willie. Please proceed.
Yeah. So I'm concerned about being more restrictive without really understanding how the original numbers came up. I definitely respect what Councilman Moore and her numbers, where she was saying, a 40-foot wide house. I am familiar with a couple houses up in Inspiration Point where it is on a very steep hill, and the retaining wall that I'm familiar with actually is 5 feet, at least 5 feet. And if you looked at the footprint of the house along that steep slope, and let's say that the house is 100 feet long by 50 feet deep, you're now at 5,000 square foot single-story house with a 5-foot retaining wall in the backyard, and that actually comes out to almost 1,000 cubic yards. If you wanted to flatten that off beyond the house on each side so that you're not walking directly into, a hillside, and so you said, well, gee whiz, the property is actually wider than that. It wouldn't take much, 50 feet on each side. Now you've got, 2,000 square feet, cubic yards of dirt. Is that a reasonable example? I don't know. I haven't given it that much thought. But I'm just saying I'm getting close to what they may have been anticipating back then. And I think we do need to move forward with this SB 9. And so I think with the concerns about the decks, the concerns about the grade change, let's accommodate those and possibly send staff back to try and recreate how that 2,500 was created and what it might look like today if somebody took several cases. And if need be, we could revisit it at a future time. But I would hate to delay this SB 9 for that unknown at this point. So I think I'm done, that we should move forward So,
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Willie. Next, we have Councilmember Way, followed by Councilmember Moore. Councilmember Way.
Right. So very briefly, it is a procedural question, but I think Vice Mayor Chow already explained it. Pointed out, if we pass this ordinance, this is our first reading, and then next meeting we'll do our second reading. In between, if there are residents coming out say, "Hey, this is just not going to work for me," like the residents who noticed the flag lot issue, what would be the procedure? What could we do to accommodate that?
So after the first reading is complete, if council desired to make additional changes, we would have to start the process over again and do another first reading. Given the timeline involved, I would not recommend that. That doesn't prevent us from revisiting the ordinance later, but I wouldn't recommend any changes after the first reading is complete.
Understand, because we need to have this before the end of this year.
Yes, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councilmember Way. Councilmember Moore.
Okay, thank you. So when we originally started, we had a 12-inch limit on the amount of cut, and now we have unlimited cut. And your limit is when you hit the 2,500 cubic yards. So we're saying, basically, you can build as tall a retaining wall as you want to, and no one on this council has a problem with that except for me, and I find that interesting. I'm a little dismayed too, considering the hillside area and that you would let that go as a ministerial approval when your staff report says already 5 feet. You know, if it's 5 feet or higher, you need to put some screening on it. And you don't have any examples in front of you showing what 2,500 cubic yards actually results in. So without that, I think you're changing what originally came to us and what people had as an expectation, which was the 12 inches. And now you're going, well, whatever, we don't really understand, but we'll approve this. And it makes a difference. Do you have a 30% slope? How much cut is going to happen there? Do you have a 10% slope? What is that going to look like? And you don't have an example of what this visually is going to result in. And I think that's unwise. So I would, as I said, I would go with either a 2 foot, maybe 3 feet, but as it is, you're going with unlimited in the hillside area. And I thought we valued the hillside area for its appearance.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Moore. Pugh, your hand is raised. Did you want to make a responsive comment?
Yes, I'm just trying to offer a suggestion, if it pleases the council, that I'm aware of at least one retaining wall up in the hills that is 12 feet tall. You can plant trees in front of that. If it pleases the council to have a limitation, that is something that the council could consider to move this process along. Right. Just for the ministerial projects.
Well, we could also direct you to come back with some information with regard to the heights of various retaining walls and, the west side of the city, right? I mean.
Yes, but that would take a little bit of research and time to get that information.
But as follow-up, so let me understand the legal posturing here. So we need to pass something before the end of the calendar year, but that doesn't prevent us from modifying the ordinance subsequently, right? There's nothing in SB 9 that states that we can't make modifications in the future. Is that right?
That's right. I mean, we'd be subject to downzoning limitations, but other than that, there would not be any limitations.
Okay. So what you're saying, Chris, is basically we could increase the number of cubic yards, but not decrease. That could be removed.
It's not that strict. I mean, I think there are changes that you could make that wouldn't restrict the density to development, and of course you could also always offset a decrease in density with one place with an increase in another place. So, for example, if we were going to bring back a package of changes where we saw things that just weren't working because they were too restrictive for whatever reason, like the flag lots are a good example of that, where we modified the rules somewhat. So I'm pretty confident that this is the kind of thing that we could address in subsequent legislation.
I think there's room to move. I mean, this might not affect that many lots, but okay. I hear what you're saying. Okay, so let's go. I have a couple of new hands raised from Vice Mayor Chow and Councilmember Willie. Councilmember Moore, your hand's raised again. So let's go to Vice Mayor Chow and then Councilmember Willie and then Councilmember Moore. Vice Mayor Chow. And unmute your microphone.
First, I want to clarify when I said we can revisit it, I mean after we adopt, after the second reading, we can still revisit an ordinance. And as for Councilmember Moore's consideration, I think I didn't fully understand it, but if the staff can make a reasonable recommendation so that we have something today, and then we can revisit later if, so could we have something that, so we can move along?
If I may, through the mayor.
Yes, please go ahead.
Again, I suggesting possibly a height limit on retaining walls, maybe that would satisfy this, for the interim. And then we can certainly evaluate, changes to that if it is something that the council wishes to look at in the future. I was trying to find one of the hillside exceptions that the city had worked on or approved for the one that I recall. And I can't find the height of that wall just now, but I do recall it's about at least 12 feet tall, if I remember right.
So yeah, it's certainly better if we adopt something that's more restrictive and then relax it later rather than relax it and then become restrictive. That I think is not as will not be as well received. So if we can adopt something that's a bit more restrictive but still reasonable, I'm open for a suggestion.
Okay, thank you, Vice Mayor Chow. We'll go to Councilmember Willie, followed by Councilmember Moore. Councilmember Willie.
So I think I'd be very much okay with, when I ran through this number and I came up with just under, 1,000 cubic yards. So I think I'd be very fine with if we started off the SB 9 ordinance and we said, okay, 1,000 cubic yards, and at some point we may increase it to 1,500. We may increase it to 2,000. Just like the general plan, it's a work in progress that can be increased as we are made aware of places where more latitude is needed. So I think for the motion for tonight, if Councilman Moore, if we're able to get to more of a consensus, if she's okay with 1,000 cubic yards or 1,500 cubic yards, that we may be able to get more consensus tonight.
Okay, well, it's...
No.
No, I'm sorry, you're out of order, sir. We can't... Nope. Okay, please. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to Councilmember Moore, and I'm going to go ahead and ask that we wrap, because I think we have a fairly
Thank you, Mayor. So if I may,
then we'll go to Councilmember Way, and then our city manager just had a hand up as well as Pew from our staff. So why don't we go to Councilmember Moore, and then we'll visit with staff.
So I actually would prefer that we stuck with a 3-foot high retaining wall maximum. Okay, so the Planning Commission suggested 12 inches, I believe, and then we'll jump it up to 3 feet and then see how that works. If we're going with the cubic yards, I think it's harder to get a sense for what you're visually going to end up with. But if you say 3 feet, then you have a sense of what that is.
Okay, well, let's go to Pamela, and then we'll go back to Pew if that's workable.
Thank you, Mayor Paul. So I do see enough conversation from the City Council supporting the recommendation, but there is the uncertainty of whether or not we made the right decision tonight. I would propose that move with the staff recommendation at this point, and we can bring it back in a year to see how many applications as we have received and what are the basically what has happened since the interim ordinance was adopted. So we have heard a number of inquiries since the sorry, I can't talk now. Interim ordinance was adopted, and we're bringing it back to council for further consideration. So if we go with staff's recommendation tonight, in a year, if there are enough concern, we can ask council for direction to modify the ordinance at that time.
Well, at the same time, I mean, to the point of being more restrictive and catching the data, right? If you end up adopting the staff recommendation wholesale, and it turns out that you are permitting some that perhaps would have been inadvisable for, whatever reason, but if you went a bit more restrictive, those wouldn't have occurred. You would be able to have some data, or if you went more restrictive with regard to either, what Councilor Moore is defining as the metric, as a 3-foot maximum for retaining wall, or whatever maximum you put in, as opposed to the amount of material that you remove. I mean, you could also bring that data back, right, in a year to give us a sense, or give council a sense, I should say, of what could have been proceeding at that time, right?
Right. So we can always bring it back in a year and to see where we are.
Right. But it cuts both ways. It could cut
exactly
both ways on what's right.
That is correct. That is correct.
So, okay, do you have any kind of recommendation as to which way we go with regard to this particular part
I do see a stronger preference for staff's recommendation, but I do hear Councilmember Moore's concern. So.
Right. Okay. So, well, let's take it staff. I mean, Pew, do you have a sense of how many homes could be potentially affected? I think there's at least one, right? I mean, we do have a member of the public here tonight.
Yes, there's one member of the public who was very eager. That lot, I think, is sloped upwards of 40%. Again, if there is some development that needs to occur, there are retaining walls that could be built behind the home. I mean, directly adjacent to this home, there is another home that was developed in about 2002, which is the home I was thinking about, that has a very large retaining wall, but it's located behind the house because the lot is downslope. So, I did want to make one clarifying comment. Councilmember Willie's calculations for 1,000 cubic yards, that is per home. So the 2,500 cubic yards is applicable across an entire RHS lot. So if you were to subdivide, that would have to be split between the two new lots. I did want to make that point. So it's not 2,500 cubic yards per home that you build. It's 2,500 cubic yards for the entire lot as it exists today.
So you're saying it's not 5,000, it's 2,500 for the entirety of the initial lot?
Of the existing lot, yeah. And if you were to subdivide, that would get split into those two lots past that.
Okay. All right. So we have Councilmember Way with hand raised again, and Vice Mayor Chow. Councilmember Way.
Very briefly, I do think we need to trust our staff. This has been 2,500 cubic yard has been since 19 something, and we need to trust our staff's expertise. We're throwing out numbers, 3 feet, 1,000 cubic feet with nothing. I mean, we're not engineers. We have not done this. I would trust the staff's judgment on this.
Well, I just with all due respect, Councilmember Way, actually, there are neither you or I are an engineer, but we have some engineers on our council. So, well, let me go and ask our council again. We're a little bit past 12:15. Another 15 minutes till 12:30. Councilmember Moore, are you okay with that?
Sure.
Councilmember Willie?
Yes.
Okay. Councilmember Way? Another 15 minutes?
Yes.
Okay. Vice Mayor Chow?
Yes.
And I am all right with that, but hopefully we can wrap in this next 15. Vice Mayor Chow?
Yeah. So I think it's true that we have some existing standard, but that was standard for discretionary approval. And this what we are going to have is a ministerial approval with no recourse if there is some issue. So I am willing to consider if Councilmember Moore has amend a proposal. I'm willing to second that. So we have a more considerate, objective standard for SB 9.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Vice Mayor Chow. Councilmember Moore, your hand is raised.
Okay, thank you. So since we actually don't have any examples of, say, a 40% lot and what the 2,500 as a ministerial approval could actually result in, that means that the public outreach didn't have any of those examples given to the public either. Okay, so here we are trying to push this through when originally we had that the diagram showing 6 inches and then 6 inches and saying, oh, that's too restrictive. So now you've moved to 12 inches, but now what we're actually seeing is a 40% slope, and you don't actually know how much cut and fill is going to happen on that within the 2,500 cubic yards. So when I'm doing my calculations, I'm ending up with a very tall retaining wall there. That's why I'm saying you need to look at, don't look at the cubic yards. It's better to go look at the height of the retaining wall. And out of all of us, I'm the one that's actually done cut and fill calcs for grading and drainage plans. So that I would like to hear from a civil engineer about this, hear what their recommendations are, but mine is 3 feet maximum, leave it at that.
Mayor,
yes, go ahead.
If I may, yeah, so I was actually going to suggest something similar to what Councilmember Moore suggested as a sort of a, just suggested as a way forward. That, for slopes greater than 10%, that the slope would be greater than, would be no more than 36 inches from the existing grade. I'm recommending that because it builds on but relaxes the standards in our interim ordinance to a certain extent. So we're kind of comparing apples to apples with respect to the type of standards we've had. Mm-hmm. But it both eliminates the open-ended concern that Councilmember Moore has, and it also has the advantage of making our ordinance language more objective. Which makes me more comfortable, actually, so that's just a suggestion that I'm throwing out there. It's obviously up to council to decide whether that's appropriate or not.
Well, it probably gives us more time to obtain a little bit more data, right, with regard to this other metric.
It's a more incremental change. That's correct.
It's a more incremental change, and we can actually ask staff to go about and see what's affected, and run the calculations on various heights of retaining walls required compared to what's out there. So, okay, if you feel, along with staff, the rest of staff, it's possible to make these changes at this point. Do we need to go ahead and if we do take a modification to the motion, do we need to take a break to redo calculations or language changes in the proposed ordinance, or?
I'm comfortable with that language that I just proposed.
As described? 3 foot maximum? Okay. All right. So I see Councilmember Wei has a hand raised, but Pugh, you also have a hand raised. Did you want to comment on this?
No, I did want to just point out really quick that on page 35 of the regular ordinance, which is attachment A, it does limit the grading on each of the new lots developed under SB 9 to 1,250 cubic yards. I did want to point out that's a standard.
Right. Well, I think that's what you had mentioned before, right, Pugh? Right, okay. Great. Councilmember Wei.
My quick question is, we do have a resident that's concerned about this. If we do this limitation to 3 feet retaining wall, it's not really tall. I have a retaining wall about 2.5 feet, and I live in a very flat lot. So would that stop this particular resident from applying for SB 9 and be approved? Be able to develop his property accordingly? So if this is going to sort of act like a chilling effect for people to do SB 9, I'm concerned because I do want to trust our staff's original recommendation. I don't see why 5 feet is really not that tall. I have a 2.5 feet already in a very flat lot. So that is my concern.
Okay, thanks, Councilmember Wood. Did staff want to speak to that, or I mean, I don't know if it's all that appropriate to talk about specific cases in this kind of context when we're trying to develop policy and ordinance for the entirety of the city. So I don't see any staff members with their hands raised, and so let me go ahead and Councilmember Willie, you're indicating that you'd like to speak or ask a question?
Yeah, just, is it possible to ask this resident if...
Can you turn on your microphone, please?
I'm sorry.
Is it possible for, we're not allowing comments from the public, but to ask him, would 36 inches on his lot prevent him from doing what he's interested? Not going beyond, just his project, so that we could have at least one reference point.
Well, I think as a point of order, I'll accept that as a request. Let me check in with our city attorney. I can reopen the public hearing, correct? For the purposes of...
Yeah, so it's not a public hearing, but the council members are able to ask questions of the audience if they choose. Yes.
Okay, very good.
Yes.
Okay, so no need to reopen the public hearing. So Councilmember Willie, sir, you've indicated a desire to speak, and so Councilmember Willie is asking for some information with regard to the feasibility.
Yes.
I believe Nagesh, right?
Yes.
Nagesh, welcome back.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'll address both the concerns. One is a civil engineer very clearly has told me that the city staff's recommendation is workable, but any limitation like 2 feet or 3 feet is not workable as the slope increases. And for a typical house, they told me that a cut and fill of about 1,500 to 2,000 cubic yards is plenty. But with an SB9 lot split, you're building 2 houses. So for 2 houses, 2,500 cubic yards becomes restrictive. You have to stick to 2,500 cubic yards cut and fill for both the houses together after a lot split.
Yeah, but the specific question that I would ask, on your site, your project, is your retaining wall going to be higher than 3 feet?
Yes, it's 10 feet at the back end. Yes. Answer is yes.
Okay.
And I do need a grade of 10 feet just because of the slope. I cannot work with a 1 foot or 2 foot restriction on the grade. Not possible.
Thank you.
And I do need a cut and fill of 2,500 cubic yards in order to build 2 houses there.
Okay, thanks very much, Councilmember Willie. Thank you very much, Nagesh. And I'll go ahead and bring this back. Pew, did you want to make a comment? I don't know if your hand is up from before I go to Councilmember Moore.
No, I just wanted to make one comment. If the council agrees with the commenter, that 3 feet is unworkable up in the hills, I think staff would still be comfortable with at least 5 feet, which is where you have to start cladding it with materials. Beyond that, that's an existing standard where there's clearly a shift in how we treat the retaining wall. So maybe council could consider a 5 foot rather than a 3 foot. And I think we could make that work with this slope.
Oh, so a 5 foot maximum, Pew, as opposed to a 3 foot maximum?
Correct.
Okay. Councilmember Moore.
Do we really want to be putting this density on 40% sloped lots without having some discretionary approval? You want to give that away. So I would stick with the 3 feet and really consider that you're looking at, if it's 40%, that's you're going up 40 feet in 100. I would think about that.
I realize that's fairly steep grade. And I would be interested in seeing data with regard to how many lots in Cupertino this affects. But again, it seems to me that that's not actually information that we have beyond the fact that we have a greater than 5% grade on the west side of Bub, which is kind of generalized information. So, okay, so it seems like we are willing to put in somewhat more restrictive, language as a whole, but I hear what, City Manager Wu was saying, that there's also an appetite to, go ahead and pass the staff recommendation. I mean, let me go ahead and check in with, Pew, did you have your hand raised again for any reason, or is that from before? Okay. So what I would suggest this time is that we take a stepwise approach. I mean, I think, from my own perspective, I think that, if staff can make 5 feet work, then, perhaps we can try to put in some accommodations. But again, the numbers are, pretty compelling with regard to wanting to see them. So how many parcels are we implicating here? 2,500 cubic yards of material is not insignificant. I realize that. And if they're talking about a 10-foot retaining wall, I mean, that's, I would really want to find out how many, different parts of the city we're dealing with in terms of the absolute number of parcels. So, well, there's a motion on the table. Without hearing any kind of proposal for an amendment or substitute motion, I would go ahead and proceed. But Councilmember Moore, your hand is raised.
I would like to see it amended with the recommended language from our city attorney for the 3 foot. So. Okay.
So I believe that, Madam City Clerk, can you remind us who the move-in and the seconder was?
You are the movement, Mayor, and Way is the seconder.
Okay. I'm going to assume that Councilmember Way, you will not accept as a second, and so.
You are correct.
Okay.
Mayor.
Not to put it on you. I mean, I think I would have accepted that as because it's a stepwise, move, and it's incremental permissivity. So, Councilmember Moore, we don't have a change motion on the floor. So.
Okay, I just want to point out that when you did outreach, the people who lived in the hillsides were not informed that this change was coming.
Okay.
So I oppose that.
Councilmember Woolley, comment?
Yeah, so
I agree. Public outreach is first and foremost very important to me. If you make the modification to your motion, I will second it.
You go ahead and second it. Okay, I accept your change, Councilmember Moore. Respectfully, Councilmember Way, you're not seconding that change, and so your second is withdrawn. Councilmember Willie seconds the modified motion, and so the maximum would be a 3 foot retention wall. So let us go ahead and take any further comments. We have Councilmember Way, and your hand is raised.
I do have a comment to make. I live in pretty flat lot, and I have a two and a half feet retaining wall. This is not going to work for some homeowners, and I don't think people are going to build things. Retaining walls are very expensive, so they're not going to build things that's not safe. We have this 25 square cubic feet for a long time, even if it's not split. So I don't see our concern. I mean, I think Attorney Chris said we could revise it if it doesn't work out, and then it doesn't consider as a downsizing. I just don't think 3 feet retaining wall is going to work out for certain people. And I have this issue with restricting this so much so that people cannot use the SB9. And I feel that this could be a way for people to say your ordinance is has chilling effects. People already know it's not going to work. That is my major concern. Okay. 3 feet, not going to work.
Got it. Well, thank you, Councilmember Way. And, when SB9 was being pushed across the state, including our own, representatives from the legislature, they specifically said that you do have objective standards that you can put in, and we're actually making these objective standards more permissive based upon what we have in our urgency ordinance. So I'm comfortable with it, but I would really like to see the data. How many lots are we affecting with regard to opening up the permissions here? And I'm compelled by the public safety concerns as well. I think it does make sense to try to add more of the units throughout the city. And so for me, I think that it's actually not a negative thing at all to go ahead and have some enhanced opportunities. However, I'd be interested as a member of the public next year to know precisely how many lots this potentially affects. So it'd be good to have that data. In the meantime, we have a motion and a second on the table. Councilmember Woolley, your hand's up. Pugh, your hand is up, as well as Vice Mayor Chow. Did you want to make a follow-on comment at this time before we go to Councilmember Woolley and then Vice Mayor Chow?
Yes, I actually was able to go to our website and get some data on how many hillside lots we have. I believe we have approximately 285 lots that would be impacted by this standard. That's all the lots that we have zoned RHS at this point.
Got it. And
per the database that I'm looking at right now.
And so that's probably a minimum of 10% grade, right? Or are they all around?
They're all at least upwards of 15%, I would say.
I see. Okay. 285. Got it. Do you have average lot sizes there, Pew? Or is it
that's
not
too
really
much.
there? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. No worries. Thanks for looking that up, though. Councilmember Woolley, followed by Vice Mayor Chow.
Yeah, so I'll start with, first and foremost, is letting the community know what changes are being put on the books. And so I would even suggest that city staff undertake a community outreach to those 250 hillside lots to find out, because it's going to be affecting their neighbors and also their downward neighbors on those hillside lots. We pass this, everybody's off and running. 90% of the city is operating under the SB 9 requirements. City staff, over the next 6 months, does notification that the city is considering higher retaining walls, greater cut and fill amounts, and let them give the city council their input. And at that point, we'll be in a better position to make a revision to our ordinance. And it may be that the revision says this is subject to specifically properties that are greater than 30%, greater than 40%. And we do this stepwise incremental change. And then we're not impacting unintended consequences from other places where somebody may be trying to do something else and impacting the neighbors. Once we put it out, as this city attorney said, we can't down zone. And I think we need to be very clear on that. We can't down zone.
Okay.
So, okay, thanks.
Councilmember Woolley. Checking back in, Councilmember Moore, are you okay with extending till 12:45? We're at 12:36 right now.
Yes. Do we have the ability to call the question, or?
Well, let me check in with council to make sure that we're all good. Councilmember Woolley, are you okay with 12:45? And Councilmember Way, we're going to try to extend this out to 12:45 at this time.
Oh, sure.
Vice Mayor Chow?
Yes.
And I'm okay with it too. Vice Mayor Chow, you have your hand raised next, and Councilmember Moore has indicated a desire to call the question, and so we'll go ahead and attempt to do that after your comments here.
Okay, so I think it's also a safety concern if you have a high retaining wall where in an earthquake zone, and then it's not only a necessity, and then the existing standard, it's a good idea to use that, but that was for discretionary approval. So I think that it's actually good policy making to be more restrictive now. And then let's take more consideration to outreach. We may relax that in the future if it makes sense. I think that's a better considerate policy making rather than be afraid of what other people would say. It's important that we have policy protect our citizens' safety.
Okay, thank you, Vice Mayor Chow.
Verified. That's great. Yeah, thank you.
Very good. So there was a request to call a question. I don't see any objections here or further comments, and so I'm going to go ahead and call this question. Councilmember Way, you have a hand raised.
I will make one final comment.
Okay.
I'm not comfortable with this limitations, but I will vote yes for it because I do recognize that we will be able to change it, or once we have an outreach to the people that's being affected, we will be able to update it next year.
Yeah, and it's a significant move forward after all. So thanks for the support. Appreciate that. Okay, so let's go ahead and call the question, Madam City Clerk.
Mayor, would you like me to conduct the first reading?
Oh, very good. So let's go ahead and conduct that first reading. Thank you for the reminder.
This is the first reading of ordinance number 22-2246 as modified, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Cupertino amending chapters 18.20.170, 19.08.030, 19.12.030, 19.12.110, 19.28.040, 19.28.050, 19.28.110, 19.28.150, 19.28.170, 19.40.050, 19.40.060, 19.40.090, and 19.112.060 to adopt standards for ministerial approval of duplexes and lot splits in single-family residential zoning districts.
Thank you very much, Madam City Clerk. And I'm going to go ahead and move that ordinance number 22-2246 be read by title only, and that the City Clerk's reading constitute the second reading, the first reading thereof, not the second reading. And so I'll go ahead and, as well, in this motion, move that we find the proposed actions exempt from CEQA. And so Councilmember Willie, confirming with the modifications that we have made to the recommended actions, are you
I
seconding
still
this?
second, yes.
Okay, very good. So I think we're complete. I'll check in with our city attorney. Chris, does that sound like everything that we need to proceed?
I think you may proceed to vote, Mayor.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you very much. Madam City Clerk, please conduct the roll call vote.
Councilmember Moore?
Aye.
Councilmember Way?
Aye.
Councilmember Willie?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Chow?
Aye.
Mayor Paul?
Yes.
The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you very much. And so I would suggest, since we are fairly significantly beyond the midnight cutoff that I try to hold us to this year, and why don't we forego the future staff comments and the council comments? Is that okay with everyone? I'm getting some faces. Councilmember Willie, and then I'll go in with Councilmember Moore.
So Vice Mayor brought up a subcommittee or a review for the homeless situation on.
How about let's do this before we get into the substance. Before we get into the substance of
Okay.
this, because the question is whether we want to forego it. I guess that's a no from you, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then Councilmember Moore, are you also a no? You're 6 of 1, half dozen. Okay, so how about this? Can we keep it within half a minute? All right. And so let's check in with our city manager first. Pamela, did you have anything that you wanted to? Okay, so shaking of the head, and I'm going to make you make sounds too. So is that that's a no, correct?
Nothing, Mayor Paul.
Nothing.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you very much. All right, Councilmember Woolley.
Yeah, so I want to second the situation on Portal with the homeless person is very important to our community, and so I think we need to do whatever we can to expedite. And whether it's an agenda item or a subcommittee, I second.
Okay, understood. Thank you very much, Councilmember Woolley. Councilmember, anyone else? Show of hands. Okay, well, we don't have any other hands raised, so I will go ahead and thank everyone for being here, and go ahead and thank my colleagues and staff. Really good meeting, and we'll go ahead and adjourn the November 1st, 2022 meeting of the Cupertino City Council. We'll see you at our next regular council meeting on November 15th. Thank you very much and good night. Meeting adjourned.